Before we dive into Kael's impossible journey from betrayal to power, make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell so you don't miss what happens next. Drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I love seeing where this story reaches. Now, let's begin. The rope bit into Kael's wrists as two enforcers shoved him forward across the frozen courtyard. His knees hit stone, and he tasted blood where his teeth had caught his lip. Around him, the pack had gathered, not to protest, but to watch, to bear witness to what happened when you became inconvenient. "Stand up!" Alpha Garen's voice cut through the wind like a blade through skin. Kael pushed himself upright, slowly, buying time his brain desperately needed. The enforcers flanked him, hands ready on their weapons, though everyone here knew Kael Thorne had never won a fight in his life. Didn't need to. Before today, he'd been valuable for other reasons. Garen stood on the platform above the courtyard, backlit by torches that made his shadow stretch across the crowd like something monstrous. He'd always been a big man, broad-shouldered, thick-necked, the kind of alpha who'd clawed his way to power and kept it through intimidation and carefully cultivated fear. But lately something had changed in his eyes. Hunger, maybe, or desperation dressed up as ambition. "Kael Thorne," Garen announced, his voice carrying across the silent assembly. "For 3 years, you've served this pack as strategist and counsel. Your mind has guided our hunts, planned our expansions, kept our borders secure." A few murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Kael's eyes scanned faces he'd known since childhood. Mira, who used to bring him tea during late-night planning sessions. Old Torvin, whose grandson Kael had saved from a bad treaty with the northern clans. Even young Jess, barely 15, whose education Kael had personally overseen. Not one of them met his gaze. "But times change," Garen continued, and there it was, Otto, the shift in tone that made Kael's stomach drop. "Opportunities arise that require sacrifice." "You're selling me." Kael's voice came out steadier than he felt. "Just say it plainly." Garen's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I prefer to think of it as a strategic alliance. With a dying warlord." Kael kept his voice flat, refusing to give Garen the satisfaction of seeing fear. "King Aldrich, right? The one who's supposedly rotting from the inside out. That's who you're sending me to?" A shocked murmur ran through the crowd. Nobody talked to the Alpha like this. Nobody challenged him in open assembly. Garen's hand tightened on the railing, knuckles going white. For a moment, Kael thought he'd gone too far, that Garen would simply order his death and be done with it. But then the Alpha's face smoothed into something worse: satisfaction. "The king requires companionship in his final days," Garen said carefully. "In exchange, he's offered a treaty that will secure our pack's future for generations. Trade routes, protection, access to the southern kingdoms." He paused, letting the words sink in. "All for one man, one sacrifice." "One body, you mean?" Kael's laugh came out bitter. "You're whoring me out to a corpse for political favor." This time Garen's smile showed teeth. "Watch your tongue, strategist. Or perhaps I should remind you what happens to those who refuse the Alpha's wisdom." The threat hung in the air, unspoken, but crystal clear. Kael's father, nearly 70 now, his wolf long since gone dormant, living in a small cabin at the edge of pack territory. Vulnerable. Alone. Kael felt the fight drain out of him like water through a sieve. "When do I leave?" he asked quietly. "Dawn." Garen turned away, already dismissing him. "The king's envoy arrives tonight. You'll go with them. Pack light. I doubt you'll need much where you're going." The enforcers hauled Kael to his feet, but he shook them off. He could walk on his own. He'd give them that much dignity, at least. As they led him away, he caught sight of his father at the edge of the crowd. Marcus Thorne looked smaller than Kael remembered. His shoulders bent, his face creased with grief and guilt. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and Kael saw his father mouth 2 words. "I'm sorry." Kael looked away. It wasn't Marcus's fault. His father had served the pack faithfully for 50 years, had given everything he had until age and injury had taken his wolf, leaving him human and helpless. In the frontier packs, that made you a liability, a weakness, and Garen had found the perfect way to exploit it. They locked Kael in the storage shed behind the communal hall. not because they thought he'd run, but because appearances mattered. The Alpha had made his decree. Kael needed to be secured until transfer. The shed smelled like dried meat and old leather, and the only light came from gaps between the wooden slats. Kael sat on a barrel of salted fish and tried to think. King Aldrich. The name alone carried weight across the frontier territories. 20 years ago, he'd been a legend, a warlord who'd carved out his own kingdom through pure brutality and tactical genius. He'd united a dozen fractured territories under his banner, crushed 3 separate rebellions, and built a fortress that had never fallen to siege. Then, 5 years ago, he'd gotten sick. The rumors varied depending on who you asked. Some said it was a curse from a witch he'd wronged. Others claimed it was poison that had worked too slowly. A few whispered about forbidden magic, deals made with things that shouldn't be bargained with. But everyone agreed on the result. King Aldrich was dying by inches, his body failing while his mind remained trapped inside, watching his kingdom slowly crumble around him. And now Garen was sending Kael to him like a funeral gift. The door rattled. Kael looked up as it swung open, revealing a figure silhouetted against the twilight. "You look like hell," Mira said softly. She slipped inside, closing the door behind her. In the dim light, Kael could see the worry creased into her face. Mira was one of the few wolves in the pack who'd never cared that Kael's wolf had come late, weak, barely there. She'd valued him for his mind, treated him like pack when others saw him as an embarrassment to the bloodline. "Feel worse," Kael admitted. "Did Garen send you to gloat? I brought you food." She held out a bundle wrapped in cloth. "And information." Kael took the bundle, bread, cheese, dried meat. His stomach growled, reminding him he hadn't eaten since morning. "What kind of information?" "The envoy arrived an hour ago." Mira settled onto a crate across from him, keeping her voice low. 3 of them, all wearing the king's colors, but black and silver. They didn't say much, but I overheard them talking to Garen. "And?" "The king is worse than anyone thought." Mira's expression went grim. "They're not expecting him to last another month, maybe less." Kael chewed slowly, processing this. "So Garen's gamble is that I'll be there just long enough to secure the treaty before the king dies. Then what? I come home? Get reassigned?" He laughed without humor. "Or do I become part of the funeral arrangements?" "Kael, it's fine." He wasn't sure who he was trying to convince. "I've been preparing for something like this my whole life. When your wolf comes in weak, when you're not built for fighting or hunting, you learn to be useful in other ways. I just didn't expect the usefulness to include my body." Mira reached across the space between them, gripping his hand. Her palm was warm, calloused from years of working the pack's defenses. "You don't have to do this. We could what?" Kael met her eyes. "Run? Hide? Your wolf wouldn't make it 3 days on the run from pack justice, and you know it. And even if we did somehow escape, they'd take it out on my father. Marcus wouldn't want this. Marcus doesn't get a choice." Kael pulled his hand back gently. "Neither do I." Garen made sure of that. They sat in silence for a long moment, listening to the wind whistle through the gaps in the walls. "The fortress," Mira said finally. "What do you know about it?" Kael's mind shifted automatically into analytical mode. A defense mechanism, maybe, but one that had served him well. Black Ridge Hold. Built into the side of a mountain, natural defenses on 3 sides. Population of maybe 2,000, including soldiers and servants. The king rules from there, but his reach extends across the southern territories. Or it did, before he got sick. "That's not what I meant." Mira leaned forward. "What do you know about the sickness?" "Only rumors." "Why?" "Because rumors are all anyone has, and you're walking into it blind." She pulled a small leather journal from inside her jacket, pressing it into Kael's hands. "I've been collecting accounts, travelers' tales, healers' reports, anything I could find about what's actually happening to King Aldrich. It's not much, but it's more than nothing." Kael opened the journal, squinting at Mira's cramped handwriting in the low light. Lists of symptoms, timelines, secondhand descriptions of the king's condition. It was scattered, contradictory in places, but it was data, real information. "Why would you do this?" he asked. Mira's smile was sad. "Because you're pack, Kael, even if Garen's forgotten what that means." She stood, brushing dust off her pants. "They'll come for you at dawn. Get some sleep if you can." She was at the door when Kyle spoke again. "Mira? Thank you." She nodded once, then slipped out into the darkness. Kyle sat alone with the journal, reading by the thin strips of moonlight filtering through the walls. The accounts painted a picture of something beyond normal disease, symptoms that came and went without pattern, treatments that worked briefly, then failed catastrophically, healers who'd tried to help and been sent away in disgrace, or worse. One passage caught his attention. The king's physician claims it's a wasting sickness, but healer Venya, who examined him last winter, said different. She told me it looked like his body was fighting itself, like two forces locked in war inside him. She tried bleeding him to release the pressure, but the wounds wouldn't close properly. They had to cauterize them. She left the fortress within a week and hasn't spoken publicly about it since. Kale read the passage 3 times, his mind churning through possibilities. Fighting itself. 2 forces at war. It reminded him of something he'd read once, years ago, in a medical text from the Eastern Kingdoms, a condition where the body's natural defenses turned against healthy tissue, causing inflammation and decay that seemed to come from nowhere. The text had called it an autoimmune response, though the term had been poorly understood even by its author. But if that's what this was... Kyle shook his head. He was grasping at straws, building theories from incomplete information and desperation. He didn't even know if he'd be allowed near the king, much less permitted to examine him. Garen had sent him as a warm body, not a healer. Still, the journal felt like a weapon. A small one, maybe useless, but it was more than he'd had an hour ago. He ate the food Mira had brought, then settled against the wall to wait for dawn. Sleep didn't come. Kyle spent the hours before sunrise turning the problem over in his mind, examining it from every angle the way he'd been trained to analyze territorial disputes and resource distributions. Assumption 1. King Aldrich was dying. Everyone agreed on this. Assumption 2. No one had been able to cure him. Multiple healers had tried and failed. Assumption 3. Garen expected Kale to die with the king, or shortly after. The treaty was the goal. Kale was just the currency. So, if Kyle wanted to survive this, truly survive, not just postpone the inevitable, he needed to change the fundamental equation. He needed to become valuable again, but in a way Garon couldn't control or exploit. He needed to save the king's life. The thought was absurd. Kyle had basic medical training, the kind every frontier wolf learned for field injuries and emergency care. He wasn't a physician, wasn't a healer, had no magical abilities or divine gifts. He had a sharp mind, a journal full of secondhand accounts, and a desperate need to not die in a stranger's fortress. Not exactly a winning combination, but it was what he had. The door opened as the first gray light of dawn crept across the sky. 2 enforcers stood silhouetted in the doorway, different ones from yesterday, but the message was the same. "Time to go," one of them grunted. Kyle stood, his back stiff from the uncomfortable night. He'd packed the journal carefully in the small travel sack they'd allowed him, along with a change of clothes and his few personal possessions. Everything else, his maps, his books, his carefully organized notes on pack strategy, Garen would inherit. Spoils of the sacrifice. They led him through the compound as the pack began stirring for the day. A few people watched from windows and doorways, but most made a point of not looking. Easier that way. Easier to pretend this wasn't happening to someone they knew, someone they'd lived beside and worked with. The envoy waited at the southern gate, 3 figures in black riding leathers trimmed with silver. Their horses were massive things, bred for endurance over speed, their breath steaming in the cold morning air. The leader stepped forward as Kyle approached. She was tall, lean, with gray threading through her dark hair and a scar that ran from her left temple to her jaw. Her eyes were the color of winter ice. "You're the offering?" Her voice matched her eyes. Cold, assessing. "Kale Thorne." He met her gaze steadily. "Though I prefer person to offering." One of the other envoys snorted, quickly stifled. The leader's expression didn't change. "I'm Commander Senna. We have a 3-day ride to Blackridge Hold. You'll ride with Corporal Javik." She gestured to the younger of the 2 men behind her. We stop only when necessary. You'll do as you're told, when you're told. Understood? Crystal clear, Garen emerged from the main hall, flanked by his personal guard. He'd dressed for the occasion. Full ceremonial armor, his alpha mark prominent on his chest, playing the role of magnanimous leader, generous in his sacrifice. Commander Senna, Garen inclined his head. I trust everything is in order? The treaty will be finalized upon our return to Black Ridge. Senna's tone was purely professional, assuming the king survives long enough to sign it. A flicker of something crossed Garen's face. Worry, maybe. Or calculation. Of course, and Kael will provide whatever comfort the king requires in his final days. Kael felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his expression neutral. No point in giving Garen the satisfaction. Mount up, Senna ordered. Kael approached the horse Javik indicated, a sturdy mare with patient eyes. He'd learned to ride young, though he'd never enjoyed it the way most wolves did. Too much could go wrong, too many variables outside his control. But he swung himself into the saddle with practiced ease, settling his travel sack in front of him. Marcus appeared at the edge of the crowd, leaning heavily on his walking stick. Their eyes met one last time. Kael saw his father's lips move, forming words the distance swallowed. Come home. Kael looked away. Move out, Senna commanded. The horses turned south, toward the mountain range that dominated the horizon, toward Black Ridge Hold and whatever waited there. Kael didn't look back. They rode hard that first day, stopping only briefly to water the horses and eat a cold lunch of jerky and hard bread. Senna set a brutal pace, pushing toward the foothills before nightfall. The other two envoys, Javik and an older woman named Petra, spoke little, saving their energy for the ride. Kael used the time to think, to plan, to examine the problem from every possible angle. The journal bounced against his leg with each stride, a constant reminder of what little he had to work with. By the time they made camp that evening in a sheltered draw between two hills, exhaustion had settled deep into Kael's bones. He'd maintained the pace, refused to show weakness, but his legs trembled as he dismounted. Javik noticed, lips quirking in something that might have been sympathy. First long ride in a while? Something like that. Kael busied himself with his saddlebags, hiding the shake in his hands. The camp routine was efficient, practiced. Petra gathered wood while Javik tended the horses. Senna walked the perimeter, checking sight lines and escape routes with the automatic precision of someone who'd survived by staying alert. Kael found himself relegated to the fire, which suited him fine. He coaxed the kindling to life, built up the flames, then settled onto his bedroll to rest his screaming thigh muscles. You're not what I expected, Petra said, appearing beside him with an armful of additional firewood. Up close, Kael could see she was older than he'd initially thought, maybe 60, with scars on her hands that spoke of long service. What did you expect? Someone more... She paused, considering. Broken. The ones your alpha usually sends. They arrive already defeated. Hollow. Kael's stomach clenched. Usually sends? How many? 3 before you. Petra settled the wood carefully, keeping the fire fed. Over the past 2 years, each time the king worsened, your alpha found someone else to offer, part of the treaty renegotiations. The bottom dropped out of Kael's world. This wasn't new, wasn't unique. Garen had been trading pack members like commodities, buying time and favor with lives. What happened to them? Kael asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted the answer. Petra's expression went carefully blank. The first 2 stayed until the king's condition stabilized enough to send them back. They returned, changed, wouldn't speak about it. Both left pack territory within a month, just vanished into the frontier. And the third? Died at Black Ridge. Fever, officially. Petra met his eyes. The king sent his regrets and a request for a replacement. Kael felt something cold settle in his chest. Not fear exactly, rage maybe, or clarity. Does Commander Senna know you're telling me this? He asked. The commander thinks you should know what you're walking into. Senna's voice came from behind them. She emerged from the darkness, moving silently despite her armor. Petra has a bad habit of speaking truths people don't want to hear. It's a gift, Petra said dryly. Senna crouched by the fire, warming her hands. In the flickering light, her scar looked deeper, more pronounced. The king is dying, Kael Thorn. That's not rumor or exaggeration, it's simple fact. What your alpha told you about companionship. She paused, choosing words carefully. That's partly true. King Aldrich is alone in his suffering. His court fears him, his healers have abandoned him, his soldiers serve out of duty rather than loyalty. So I'm there to ease his final days, Kael said. Be a familiar face. Hold his hand while he rots. If that's all you choose to be. Senna's ice blue eyes studied him. But Petra's right. You're not like the others. You have something behind your eyes. Purpose, maybe. Or defiance. Kael considered lying, playing the role of compliant sacrifice. But something in Senna's gaze suggested she'd see through it immediately. I'm going to try to save him, he said simply. Javik, who'd been checking the horses, turned sharply. Petra went very still. Senna's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture. Why? She asked. Because if I don't, I'm dead anyway. Maybe not immediately, but eventually. Kael pulled the journal from his pack, holding it up. I have some ideas. Theories, really. Probably useless, but it's more than nothing. You're not a healer, Javik said. No, but I'm a strategist. I solve problems by looking at them differently, finding patterns others miss. Kael opened the journal, showing them Mira's cramped notes. The king's condition. Everyone treats it like a singular disease, something to be cured with one solution. But what if it's not? What if it's multiple systems failing in sequence or in conflict? Senna took the journal, reading by firelight. Her eyebrows rose slightly as she scanned the entries. Where did you get this, she asked. A friend. She compiled it from whatever sources she could find. Kael met the commander's eyes. I know it's not much. I know the odds of me succeeding where trained physicians failed are basically zero. But I have to try, because the alternative is waiting to die, and I'm not good at waiting. Silence fell over the camp. Somewhere in the distance, a nightbird called, its cry echoing off the hills. Senna closed the journal, handing it back. The king's physician is a man named Corvain. He served the crown for 30 years and has the ego to match. He will not take kindly to an outsider questioning his methods. I didn't expect him to. The court will be worse. They're circling like carrion birds, waiting for the king to fall so they can fight over the scraps of his kingdom. Senna's voice held an edge of barely controlled anger. They want him dead. If you actually manage to help him, they'll see you as a threat. Noted. And the king himself. Senna paused, something complicated crossing her face. King Aldrich is not an easy man. He's in constant pain, furious at his own weakness, distrustful of everyone around him. He may not want your help. Then I'll convince him otherwise. Kael tried to sound more confident than he felt. I'm good at convincing people. Javik laughed quietly. Well, at least you're not boring. Petra stood, brushing off her pants. I'll take first watch. The rest of you get some sleep. We have 2 more days of hard riding ahead. The others settled into their bedrolls, but Kael found sleep elusive. He lay staring up at the stars, visible between gaps in the cloud cover, and wondered what kind of man he'd find at Blackridge Hold, a dying king, a broken body, a fortress full of vultures, and somewhere in all of that, maybe, just maybe, a way to survive. The second day brought them into the foothills proper. The terrain grew rougher, the paths narrower, the air thinner and colder. They passed through 2 small settlements, both of which paid immediate deference to Senna's colors and asked no questions about the extra rider. Kael used the riding time to read more of Mira's journal, committing details to memory. Patterns began to emerge in the chaos of symptoms and failed treatments. The king's condition seemed to cycle, periods of relative stability followed by sudden, devastating crashes. The timing wasn't regular enough to be predictable, but it was there. Like waves, Kael thought, building, cresting, breaking. During their brief stops, he tried to draw Senna out, learn more about the king and his condition. She was cautious in her responses, weighing each word, but Kael got the sense she was hopeful, or maybe just desperate enough to want to believe someone could help. The king I served 20 years ago, she said during their second night's camp, was brilliant, Ruthless, yes, but fair within his own code. He built something out of nothing, unified territories that had been at war for generations. Her expression went distant. This sickness has been slow torture for him. Watching everything he built start to crumble while he's trapped in a body that's betraying him. Do you think he wants to die? Kael asked quietly. Senna was silent for a long time. I think he wants to stop suffering, whether that means death or recovery. She shook her head. I honestly don't know anymore. On the morning of the third day, they crested a ridge and Blackridge Hold came into view. Kael's breath caught. The fortress was built directly into the mountainside, black stone rising seamlessly from gray rock. Towers stretched toward the sky, their tops lost in low-hanging clouds. Walls thick enough to withstand siege engines circled the complex in concentric rings, each layer defensible on its own. The main gate stood open, but Kael could see the murder holes above them, the positioned archers, the kill zones designed into every approach. This was a place built by someone who understood warfare at a fundamental level, someone who'd planned for every contingency, every attack, every possible breach, someone who was now dying inside its walls. Impressive, isn't it? Javik said, pulling his horse alongside Kael's. Terrifying, Kael corrected, in the best possible way. They descended toward the gates. Guards snapped to attention as they approached, recognizing Senna immediately. The commander exchanged brief words with the gate captain, too quiet for Kael to hear, then they were waved through. Inside, Blackridge Hold was a small city unto itself. Streets wound between buildings carved partially from the mountain itself. Smithies, barracks, storage houses, stables, everything necessary to sustain a siege indefinitely. People moved with purpose through the streets, but Kael noticed the tension in their movements, the way conversations dropped to whispers as Senna's group passed. They dismounted at the central keep, where another captain waited to take their horses. The king? Senna asked. Awake, in pain. The captain's expression was grim. Corvain is with him now. Senna nodded, then turned to Kael. This is where it gets real. Once you enter the king's presence, there's no changing your mind, no going back. Your alpha made his deal. You fulfill it, or you face the consequences. She paused. Unless you have objections to register now. Kael thought about his father, alone in pack territory, with Garen's implied threat hanging over him. He thought about Mira, who'd risked herself to give him a fighting chance. He thought about the 3 others who'd come before him, broken or dead. No objections, he said. Then follow me. They climbed wide stone stairs, passing through checkpoints where guards examined Senna's credentials with paranoid thoroughness. The deeper they went into the keep, the quieter it became, until Kael could hear nothing but their footsteps and his own breathing. Finally, they stopped before a heavy wooden door reinforced with iron bands. 2 guards stood watch, their hands resting on sword hilts. Senna knocked once, a specific pattern. A moment later, the door swung inward. The smell hit Kael first, antiseptic sharp beneath something sweeter, almost rotten. The chamber beyond was large but felt cramped, filled with medical equipment, tables covered in bottles and bandages, screens set up to block drafts. A figure moved between the screens, tall, thin, wearing the robes of a physician. He turned as they entered, and Kael saw a man in his 60s with a severe face and eyes that blazed with barely controlled frustration. Commander, the man said curtly, I assume this is the latest offering from Alpha Garen? Physician Corvain. Senna's tone was carefully neutral. This is Kael Thorne. Corvain looked Kael up and down with obvious disdain. Another wolf. How original. Does your Alpha truly believe the king requires a parade of dying companions, or is this some elaborate insult? I'm not dying, Kael said before he could stop himself. Corvain's eyebrows rose. Give it time. Where is the king? Senna cut in before the conversation could deteriorate further. Resting. The pain was severe this morning. I administered a tincture that should help him sleep. Corvain moved to a nearby table, beginning to organize his instruments with jerky, aggressive movements. Though rest is a generous term when all sleep brings him is temporary escape from agony. Kael stepped deeper into the room, his eyes scanning the medical equipment. Most of it he recognized from frontier field care, but some was more sophisticated. Devices for measuring pulse, temperature, breathing, all currently unused. What's his condition today? Kael asked. Corvain turned, fixing him with a withering stare. And what possible business is that of yours? Kael is curious about the king's health, Senna said carefully. Curious? Corvain's laugh was bitter. How delightful. Another amateur with theories, no doubt. Tell me, Wolf, did you spend your 3-day journey reading miracle cures and dusty journals? Planning to save the king where decades of actual medical expertise have failed? Kael felt his face heat but kept his voice level. I read accounts of his symptoms, yes, and I have questions. Questions. Corvain slammed a bottle down hard enough to crack the table. I have spent years fighting this disease. I have tried every treatment known to medicine, consulted with healers from 6 kingdoms, experimented with compounds that would make your frontier pack's remedies look like children's playthings. And you have questions. Yes, Kael said simply. The room went silent. Corvain stared at him, chest heaving, face flushed with rage. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed, a short, sharp bark of sound without humor. Fine. Ask your questions, Wolf. When you're finished embarrassing yourself, someone will show you to your quarters. You can wait there until the king wakes and decides whether he wants to see you. Corvain turned away dismissively. If he bothers. The last one he barely acknowledged before sending him away. Kael glanced at Senna. The commander gave him a slight nod, though whether it was encouragement or warning, he couldn't tell. His symptoms cycle, Kael began. Periods of stability followed by sudden deterioration. The pattern isn't regular, but it's consistent. Why? Unknown. Corvain didn't turn around. If I knew why, I'd know how to stop it. Have you tried tracking external factors? Diet changes, weather patterns, stress events? Of course. And? No correlation. Corvain's shoulders were tense, his hands moving mechanically through his organizing. The cycles appear random. What about the treatments themselves? Could they be causing the crashes? Now Corvain did turn slowly. Are you suggesting I'm harming the king? I'm suggesting treatments designed for normal illness might worsen a condition that isn't normal. Kael pulled out Mira's journal. One of these accounts mentions the king's wounds not closing properly after bleeding. That's not typical for a wasting disease. The account is from a disgraced healer who was expelled from the hold. Why was she expelled? Corvain's jaw worked. She overstepped her authority, made wild claims about the king's condition being self-inflicted by his own body's defenses. Kael's heart rate kicked up. Autoimmune response. Nonsense, Corvain snapped. The body doesn't attack itself. It does, actually. Rare, but documented. Kael flipped through the journal to a page he'd marked. Eastern medical texts describe conditions where immune systems turn against healthy tissue, causing inflammation, pain, and progressive damage that mimics infection or disease. Frontier superstition. Then why did the bleeding fail? Why do wounds refuse to heal? Why does he cycle between improvement and decline with no pattern? Kael stepped closer, pressing his advantage. Because you're treating symptoms without understanding the cause. You're fighting an enemy you can't see. Corvain's face had gone white. You presume? I presume nothing. I observe, I question, I look for patterns. Kael kept his voice steady, reasonable. You're an expert physician, Corvain. You've forgotten more about medicine than I'll ever learn, but you're too close to this. You need fresh eyes. Fresh eyes. Corvain's voice dripped with contempt. From a wolf who spent 3 days reading second-hand accounts. Yes. They faced each other across the cluttered room, tension crackling between them. Senna shifted slightly, hand moving toward her sword hilt in case this turned violent. Then, from behind one of the screens, a voice spoke. Raw, rough with pain and exhaustion, but carrying absolute authority. Let him try. Everyone in the room froze. Corvain recovered first, rushing toward the screens. Your Majesty, you should be resting. I've been resting for 5 years. The voice coughed, wet and harsh. It hasn't helped. Bring him here. Senna looked at Kael, one eyebrow raised in question. Kael nodded, his mouth suddenly dry. This was it. The moment everything changed or fell apart completely. He walked toward the screens, aware of Corvain's furious gaze boring into his back, of Senna's hand still on her sword, of his own heartbeat hammering against his ribs. He rounded the screen and saw King Aldrich for the first time. The man in the bed was a ruin. Once powerful muscles had wasted to gaunt hollows, skin stretched tight over bones, mottled with bruises and half-healed wounds. His eyes, though, his eyes burned with fierce intelligence and barely suppressed rage. "So," King Aldrich rasped, "another sacrifice from Garen. What makes you different from the others?" Cale met those burning eyes and told the truth. "I don't plan to die here." The king's lips twitched. It might have been a smile. "Good. I'm tired of corpses in my bedroom." He coughed again, his whole body convulsing with the effort. When he caught his breath, he fixed Kael with that penetrating stare. "Corvain says you think you can cure me. I think there might be a cure, yes, if I'm right about what's wrong. And if you're wrong, then I fail. But I fail trying, not waiting." Silence stretched between them. Then King Aldrich shifted slightly, wincing at the movement. "You have 7 days. Corvain will give you access to his notes, his equipment, everything you need. At the end of 7 days, if I'm not better, you leave. Go back to your alpha. Go anywhere. I don't care. But if you succeed," his eyes glittered, "then we'll discuss what comes next." "Your Majesty," Corvain began. 7 days, the king repeated, his voice carrying the weight of absolute command. "That's my decree. Oppose it, and you join him in failure." Corvain's mouth snapped shut. King Aldrich's gaze returned to Kael. "Well, do you accept?" 7 days. 1 week to solve a medical mystery that had stumped trained physicians for years. To cure a king who was supposed to be beyond saving. To turn sacrifice into survival. Kael thought about Garen's smug smile, about his father's guilty tears, about Mira's whispered encouragement. "I accept," he said. King Aldrich nodded once, then let his eyes drift closed. "Good. Now get out. All of you. I need to sleep before this fool starts experimenting on me." Senna ushered Kael and Corvain from the chamber. Once the door closed behind them, the physician turned on Kael with barely controlled fury. "You have condemned yourself," he hissed. 7 days. You'll be lucky if you last 3 before you realize how far beyond your understanding this is. "Then help me," Kael said. "If you want him cured, actually help me instead of protecting your pride." Corvain's face worked through several expressions before settling on cold professionalism. "Very well. You want my notes? My equipment? You'll have them. And when you fail, because you will fail, I'll be there to document exactly how your arrogance killed any chance of saving him." He stalked away down the corridor, robes billowing behind him. Senna waited until he was out of earshot before speaking. "That went better than expected." Kael's laugh came out slightly hysterical. "That was better? He didn't try to have you removed from the hold. Trust me, that's progress." She started walking, gesturing for Kael to follow. "Come on, I'll show you to your quarters. You should rest while you can. You're going to need it." They walked through the keep's winding corridors, passing servants and soldiers who all gave Senna respectful distance. Kael's mind was already racing ahead, cataloging what he'd need, what questions to ask, what experiments might yield answers. 7 days. It wasn't much, but it was more than he'd had this morning. The quarters Senna assigned him were small but functional. A narrow room with a bed, a desk, and a window overlooking the inner courtyard. Kael dropped his travel sack on the floor and immediately regretted it. His legs felt like they'd been replaced with something that barely remembered how to hold weight. "Food will be brought up within the hour," Senna said from the doorway. "After that, you're on your own. Corvain's office is 3 floors down, East Wing. He'll be waiting." She paused, studying him. "Get some rest first. You look half dead." "Feel it too." "Good. The king respects honesty even when it's ugly." She turned to leave, then stopped. "Kael? Don't waste this chance. 7 days sounds like a lot, but it'll disappear faster than you think." After she left, Kael stood at the window and watched the courtyard below. Soldiers drilled in precise formations. Servants hurried between buildings with purpose. Everything moved like a machine built for war, but the gears were grinding slower now, waiting for the inevitable moment when the center would collapse and the whole thing would tear itself apart. He thought about King Aldrich's ruined body, those burning eyes. The man was dying by inches, and everyone around him had accepted it as inevitable. Even Corvain, for all his fury and expertise, had stopped looking for solutions and started managing decline. But Kael had seen something in the physician's notes that nobody else seemed to recognize. The pattern wasn't random. It just looked that way if you were searching for external causes. What if the trigger was internal? What if the king's own body was the battlefield? A knock interrupted his thoughts. A young servant entered with a tray. Bread, cheese, some kind of stew that smelled better than anything Kael had eaten in days. The boy set it down without meeting Kael's eyes and fled like the room was on fire. Word had already spread then. The new sacrifice, the one the king had given 7 days. Kael ate mechanically, his mind already 3 steps ahead. He needed Corvain's complete medical history. He needed to understand every treatment attempted, every response documented. He needed blood samples if possible, tissue samples if they existed, anything that would give him actual data instead of second-hand observations. And he needed to do it all while the court physician actively worked against him. The food helped. Not enough to erase the bone-deep exhaustion, but enough to function. Kael splashed water on his face from the wash basin, changed into his other shirt, slightly less travel-stained, and headed for the east wing. Corvain's office was exactly what Kael expected. Organized chaos barely contained by shelving and systematic labeling. Books lined every wall, stacked 3 deep in places. Tables overflowed with equipment, scales, burners, distillation apparatus, dozens of bottles containing substances Kael couldn't identify. The smell was overwhelming, chemical sharp mixed with herbal undertones and something vaguely metallic. Corvain sat at a massive desk in the center of the room, surrounded by open journals. He didn't look up when Kael entered. "The king's complete medical history is in the cabinet to your left," he said flatly. "Organized chronologically. Every symptom, every treatment, every failure meticulously documented. 5 years of futility neatly cataloged for your review." Kael moved to the cabinet, pulling open the first drawer. Inside were dozens of leather-bound journals, each one labeled with dates. He pulled out the earliest one and flipped it open. The handwriting was precise, almost mechanical. Date, time, observed symptoms, treatment administered, results. Page after page of clinical observations, growing progressively more desperate as time wore on. "You can work at that table." Corvain gestured without looking up. "Don't touch my equipment without permission. Don't contaminate anything. And don't ask stupid questions. If the answer was in those journals, I'd have found it years ago." Kael carried the first 3 journals to the indicated table and started reading. The early entries painted a picture of sudden onset. King Aldrich had been in perfect health, no warning, no gradual decline. One morning he'd woken with joint pain and fatigue. Within a week, the pain had spread throughout his body. Within a month, he could barely walk. Corvain had tried everything: anti-inflammatories, pain management, various tinctures designed to boost the body's natural healing. Some worked temporarily, most did nothing, a few made things dramatically worse. Kael read for hours, making notes in the margins of his own journal, cross-referencing symptoms with the accounts Mira had compiled. Patterns emerged slowly, like shapes resolving from fog. The king's condition did cycle, but the cycles weren't consistent in length. Sometimes he'd have 2 weeks of relative stability, sometimes only 3 days. The crashes, though, those were consistent. Sudden, severe, accompanied by specific symptoms: fever, inflammation, wounds that wouldn't heal, extreme sensitivity to light and sound. "Question," Kael said without looking up. Corvain's pen stopped scratching. "I said no stupid questions." "During the crashes, have you ever measured his temperature precisely? Not just, he has fever, but actual numbers?" Silence. Then, "Why would that matter?" "Because if the fever spikes follow a pattern, it might tell us something about what's triggering the response." Kael flipped to a page covered in Corvain's cramped handwriting. "You note here that during the crash in autumn of last year, his temperature was dangerously elevated. But you don't give specifics." "I was focused on keeping him alive, not taking academic measurements." "I understand. But moving forward—" "There won't be a moving forward," Corvain snapped. "You have 7 days, Wolf, then you fail, and we return to actual medical care." Kael set down his journal carefully. "You want me to fail?" I want you to stop wasting everyone's time with amateur theories. Because if I succeed, it means you missed something. Kale kept his voice level. It means 5 years of expertise couldn't solve what a frontier strategist figured out in 3 days of reading. Corvain's face flushed dark red. You arrogant! I'm desperate, Kale interrupted. There's a difference. You have your pride and your reputation to protect. I just have my life, which is worth exactly nothing if the king dies or if I fail to help him. He met Corvain's furious gaze. So yes, I'm going to ask questions you think are stupid. I'm going to challenge assumptions you've held for years, because I don't have the luxury of being careful with your feelings. For a moment, Kale thought Corvain might actually hit him. The physician's hands clenched into fists, his whole body trembling with rage. Then, slowly, something in his expression shifted. Not agreement exactly, but maybe a grudging recognition. The thermometer readings are in Journal 12, he said quietly. I started taking precise measurements 8 months ago after... He paused. After I accepted that academic documentation was all I had left to offer. Kyle found Journal 12. The temperature readings were there, meticulously recorded, and they did follow a pattern, not in timing, but in intensity. Every crash spiked the king's temperature to almost exactly the same level, 104 degrees. High enough to be dangerous, but not high enough to kill. His body is fighting something, Kyle murmured, but it's not an infection. If it were infection, the fever would vary based on pathogen load. This is controlled, like a threshold being crossed. That makes no sense. It does if his immune system is responding to a perceived threat that isn't actually there. Kale's mind raced through possibilities. What if something in his body is being misidentified as hostile? His immune system attacks it, causes massive inflammation, then backs off when the perceived threat is neutralized. Except nothing was actually neutralized, so the cycle starts again. Corvain stood abruptly, moving to where Kyle sat. He grabbed Journal 12, scanning the entries with new eyes. If that were true, he said slowly, then standard anti-inflammatory treatments would help. They do help, temporarily, but then the effect wears off and the crash is worse. Kyle pulled up another journal, finding the relevant passages. Look, here, and here. Every time you administer willow bark extract or feverfew, he improves for a few days. Then the next crash is more severe than the one before. Because I'm suppressing the immune response, but not addressing the cause, Corvain whispered. So when the suppression wears off, the system overcompensates. Exactly. They stared at each other across the cluttered table. For the first time, Corvain's expression held something other than contempt. This is still just theory, he said. Brilliant theory, I'll grant you, but theory nonetheless. We'd need to identify what his body is misidentifying as a threat. We'd need to find a way to retrain his immune system to ignore it. We'd need a sample, Kyle finished. Fresh tissue, preferably from an inflamed area during a crash. Impossible. The king barely tolerates my examinations during stable periods. During a crash, he's in too much pain to allow any invasive procedures. Kale thought about King Aldrich's burning eyes, his rasping challenge. What makes you different from the others? What if he understood it might save his life? Kyle asked. He's understood that about every treatment I've attempted. It hasn't made the pain easier to bear. But those treatments were shots in the dark. This would be different. A specific intervention based on identified cause. Kale stood, pacing between the tables. If we can convince him that one moment of additional pain might end years of suffering. You're assuming we can actually cure this. Corvain's voice carried warning. Even if your theory is correct, even if we identify the trigger, autoimmune conditions don't have simple cures. At best, we'd be managing symptoms for the rest of his life. Better than dying. Is it? The question was bitter, exhausted. You haven't watched him suffer day after day, year after year. You haven't seen what this has done to him, not just physically, but mentally. Sometimes I think death would be a mercy. Kale stopped pacing. Does he think that? Corvain was quiet for a long time. I don't know anymore. He stopped talking to me about anything real 2 years ago. Now he just issues orders and endures. A knock at the door interrupted them. A young woman in servant's livery entered, her face pale. Physician Corvain, she said breathlessly. The king requests your presence. She swallowed hard. He's crashing again. Corvain grabbed his medical bag without hesitation. Kale followed. You should stay here, Corvain said as they hurried through the corridors. Not a chance. They reached the king's chamber to find it in controlled chaos. Servants moved with practiced efficiency, bringing cold water, fresh linens, anything that might provide comfort. The guards at the door looked grim. Inside, King Aldrich writhed on the bed, his body arching with pain. The veins in his neck stood out like ropes. His skin had taken on a grayish cast, and sweat soaked through the sheets. How long has he been like this? Corvain demanded, already moving to the bedside. 20 minutes, one of the attending servants answered. It came on suddenly. He was sleeping, then he woke screaming. Corvain began his examination with swift, practiced movements. Pulse, rapid and thready. Temperature, climbing toward that 104-degree threshold. Pupils dilated, muscles rigid with tension. Kale watched from the doorway, his mind cataloging every detail. This was what Corvain's journals had described, but seeing it in person was different, more visceral, more obviously wrong. The king's eyes rolled toward him, struggling to focus. You, he rasped. The wolf. I'm here, Your Majesty. 7 days, not looking, promising. Each word came with visible effort. Corvain was preparing an injection, something for the pain, Kyle assumed, but his hands shook slightly as he drew the medicine into the syringe. Wait, Kyle said. Everyone turned to stare at him. Don't give him that, Kale continued, stepping into the room. Not yet. Have you lost your mind? Corvain's voice rose. He's in agony. And the pain medication will suppress his immune response, which will make the crash shorter but the next one worse. Kale moved closer to the bed, ignoring the shocked gasps from the servants. Your Majesty, I need to examine you right now while you're crashing. It's the only way to understand what's happening. King Aldrich's laugh came out as a harsh wheeze. You want to study me while I'm dying? I want to save you, but I need data. I need to see what your body is fighting. The king's eyes locked onto his, searching. Kale saw the calculation happening behind that pain-glazed stare, weighing options, measuring risks, deciding if this arrogant wolf was worth the additional suffering. Do it, Aldrich ground out. Your Majesty, this is madness, Corvain began. I said, do it. The king's voice carried command even through the pain. You have your 7 days, wolf, but if you're going to waste them, torturing me for nothing, I won't waste them. Kyle turned to Corvain. I need your sharpest scalpel, clean bandages, and something to preserve tissue samples. For a moment he thought Corvain would refuse. Then the physician moved with jerky, reluctant efficiency, gathering the requested items. Kale examined the king's body, looking for areas of obvious inflammation. The joints were swollen, hot to the touch. The skin around them was mottled red and purple, stretched tight over fluid buildup. I'm going to make a small incision here, Kyle said, indicating the king's right knee. Just deep enough to extract inflamed tissue. It's going to hurt. Everything hurts. Aldrich's eyes were closed now, his jaw clenched. Get on with it. Kyle took the scalpel Corvain offered. His hands were steadier than they had any right to be. One cut, precise, shallow, just deep enough to reach the inflamed tissue beneath the skin. The king's back arched, a sound escaping him that wasn't quite human. The servants gasped. Corvain stepped forward as if to intervene, then stopped himself. Kyle worked quickly, extracting a small sample of the swollen tissue and placing it in the preservative solution Corvain had prepared. Then he pressed clean bandages against the wound, applying pressure to stop the bleeding. Except the bleeding didn't stop. Blood seeped through the bandages faster than it should. Kale pressed harder, but the flow continued, spreading across the white cloth in an expanding crimson stain. It's not clotting, he said, trying to keep panic out of his voice. Corvain was there instantly, shouldering Kyle aside. He examined the wound, his face going white. Cauterize it, now! One of the servants rushed to heat an iron in the brazier. The smell of burning metal filled the room. King Aldrich had gone very still, his breathing shallow. Interesting, he whispered. So this is how it ends. Killed by my own cure. You're not dying, Kael said, though he wasn't sure who he was trying to convince. The bleeding will stop. It won't. Aldrich's eyes opened, eerily calm. Happened before. With the other healer, the one Corvain expelled. The servant returned with the heated iron. Corvain took it, his jaw set. This is going to hurt, he said unnecessarily. The cauterization smell was worse than the burning metal. Flesh and blood, and something chemical. King Aldrich made no sound, but his entire body went rigid, tendons standing out like cables under his skin. The bleeding stopped. Corvain dressed the wound with shaking hands, his professional calm finally cracking. Get out, he said to Kael, voice low and dangerous. Get out before I have you thrown from the highest tower. But the sample, out. The servants scattered. Kael grabbed the preserved tissue and fled. Back in his quarters, Kael set the sample on his desk and tried to stop his own hands from shaking. He'd known it was a risk. He'd known the king's body wasn't responding normally. But seeing the blood pour out, watching Corvain's desperate cauterization, understanding how close they'd come to killing the man he was supposed to save. A knock at the door. Kael opened it to find Senna, her expression unreadable. The whole fortress is talking, she said. Half think you tried to assassinate the king. The other half think you're an incompetent fool who got lucky Corvain was there to save him. And what do you think? Senna stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. Her eyes fell on the tissue sample. I think you got what you needed, and now you have 5.5 days to make it worth nearly killing him for. She left without waiting for a response. Kael stared at the sample. The tissue floated in preservative, already starting to break down. He needed to examine it soon before cellular structure degraded beyond recognition. But he needed Corvain's microscope for that, and Corvain currently wanted him dead. He waited until late evening, when the fortress had settled into uneasy quiet. Then he made his way back to Corvain's office. The physician sat at his desk, head in his hands, surrounded by open journals. He didn't look up when Kael entered. I should have you arrested, Corvain said to the desktop, charged with attempted regicide, executed before morning. But you won't. Kael set the tissue sample on the desk between them. Because you're curious what we'll find. Corvain's head came up slowly. His eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted. You almost killed him. I know. For a theory, an untested, unproven theory. Yes. You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the most reckless. Corvain reached for the sample, holding it up to the lamplight. Possibly both. Can I use your microscope? For a long moment, Corvain didn't answer. Then he stood, moving to one of the equipment tables. I'll prepare the slide myself. You're not touching my instruments with those blood-stained hands. They worked in silence. Corvain prepared a thin section of the tissue, mounted it on a glass slide, positioned it under the microscope. His movements were precise, automatic, the muscle memory of decades. Look, he said, stepping back. Kael peered through the eyepiece. The cellular structure came into focus, magnified hundreds of times. Even with his limited training, he could see the damage. Cell walls broken down, tissue architecture collapsing, and everywhere, surrounding the damaged cells like an army laying siege, immune cells. It's not attacking an invader, Kael breathed. It's attacking him, his own tissue. Corvain looked through the microscope himself, adjusting the focus. I've never seen an immune response like this. The concentration of defensive cells is extraordinary, as if his body has identified this joint tissue as the greatest threat it's ever faced. Can you identify what triggered it? Not from a single sample. I'd need tissue from multiple sites, preferably during both stable periods and crashes. I'd need... Corvain stopped himself. We'd need to do this again. Multiple times. The king won't survive multiple incisions if the bleeding keeps happening. Then we find a way to make his blood clot properly. Corvain moved to his shelves, pulling down jars and bottles. There are compounds that promote coagulation, derived from various plants, animal products. If I can create a solution concentrated enough to counteract whatever is preventing normal clotting. They worked through the night. Corvain tested different compounds, adjusting ratios, documenting results with obsessive precision. Kael assisted where he could, mostly fetching and carrying, but also asking questions that sometimes sparked new directions. As dawn light began filtering through the windows, Corvain sat back with a vial of yellowish liquid. "This should work," he said. "Applied topically to the wound site before incision, it should promote rapid clotting even in his compromised state." He paused. "Should being the critical word. We won't know until we try." "How's the king?" Kael asked. "Stable. The crash subsided around midnight. He's sleeping now, or trying to." Corvain set down the vial carefully. "I gave him the pain medication after you left. He needed it." "I know. I'm sorry I asked you to wait." "Don't be. You were right. Suppressing the immune response just postpones the inevitable." Corvain rubbed his eyes. "I should have seen this years ago. Should have recognized the pattern." "You were too close to it. Sometimes it takes fresh eyes." Fresh, arrogant eyes that nearly killed my patient. But there was no heat in the words anymore. Just exhaustion. A knock at the door. One of the king's personal servants entered, looking harried. "Physician Corvain? The king is awake and requesting the wolf." Kael and Corvain exchanged glances. "Tell his majesty we'll both attend him shortly," Corvain said. They found King Aldrich propped up in bed, looking marginally better than he had 12 hours ago. The grayish cast had faded from his skin, and his eyes had regained some of their fierce clarity. "So," he said as they entered, "did you learn anything worth bleeding me for?" Kael stepped forward. "Yes, your majesty. Your immune system is attacking your own tissue. We don't know why yet, but we know what. That's more than we had yesterday. And can you stop it? Maybe. If we can identify the trigger, what's making your body misidentify healthy tissue as a threat, we might be able to retrain your immune system to ignore it." "Maybe" and "might." Aldrich's laugh was bitter. Not exactly confident words. They're honest ones. Kael met his gaze steadily. "I won't lie to you about the odds. This is unexplored territory. But it's a path forward, which is more than anyone's had in 5 years." The king studied him for a long moment. Then his eyes shifted to Corvain. "And you? Do you agree with this theory?" Corvain hesitated, then nodded. "The cellular evidence supports it. I've never seen anything quite like this, but the pattern matches what limited documentation exists on autoimmune conditions. If we can... How many more times will you need to cut me open?" The question hung in the air. "At least 3 more samples," Kael said. "One from a different joint during a crash, one from healthy tissue during stable period, and one from an organ site, if possible." "No organs." Aldrich's voice was flat. "I've had enough knives in me to last several lifetimes. You get your joint samples, nothing more." "That should be sufficient," Corvain said quickly. "With the clotting agent I've developed, the risk of uncontrolled bleeding is significantly reduced." "Significantly reduced." Aldrich smiled without humor. "Not eliminated." "Nothing in medicine is ever eliminated, your majesty, only managed." The king closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, something had shifted in his expression. A decision made. A die cast. "You have 4 days left, Wolf. If you need to bleed me again, do it. If you need to prod and poke and experiment, do it. But understand this. If I'm going to suffer for your theories, they had better lead somewhere. If they don't..." He paused. "Well, I've executed men for less than wasting my time." "Understood," Kael said. "Good. Now get out, both of you. And send in food. Real food, not that broth Corvain keeps trying to force on me. If I'm going to be your laboratory experiment, at least feed me properly." Back in the corridor, Corvain turned to Kael. "You have a gift for making situations worse. Story of my life. 4 days. We need samples. We need analysis. We need to identify the trigger and develop a treatment." Corvain was already walking, his mind clearly racing ahead. "We'll need to monitor him constantly. Watch for the next crash. Be ready to..." "Corvain." The physician stopped, turning back. "Thank you," Kael said, "for believing me, or at least for being willing to try." Corvain's expression softened slightly. "Don't thank me yet. Thank me if we actually save him." He paused. "And Kael? That sample last night, that took courage. Stupidity, yes, but also courage. I've served the king for 30 years, and I stopped fighting for him somewhere along the way. Started managing his decline instead of fighting for his recovery. His jaw tightened. You reminded me what it means to actually try. He walked away before Kael could respond. Kael stood in the empty corridor, exhaustion finally catching up with him. His hands still had traces of the king's blood under the nails. His back ached from hunching over journals. His head throbbed with too much information and too little sleep. 4 days. He'd made enemies of half the court just by existing. The king had given him permission to continue experimenting, but that permission could be revoked the moment the pain became too much. And somewhere back in Pact territory, Garen was probably already planning what to do with Kael's father, once news arrived that the king had died and the treaty had failed. But for the first time since being dragged into that frozen courtyard, Kael felt something other than fear or resignation. He felt purpose. The next crash came 36 hours later, in the dead of night. Kael was ready this time, had barely slept, staying close to the king's chambers, waiting for the inevitable. When the screaming started, he was there within minutes, Corvain's clotting compound in hand. The king's left elbow was the target this time, swollen to grotesque proportions. Kael worked fast, applying the compound, making the incision, extracting tissue, while Aldrich's teeth nearly cracked from clenching. The bleeding was less this time, not controlled exactly, but manageable. The compound worked. "Third time better be the charm," Aldrich gasped when it was over, "because I'm running out of joints I can afford to lose." 3 days left, and they had 2 samples from active inflammation. Now they needed the healthy tissue comparison, and that meant waiting for the king to stabilize, which could take hours or days. It took 18 hours. Kael made the 3rd incision on the king's right wrist, an area showing no signs of inflammation. The procedure was almost routine now, if you could call cutting into a monarch's flesh routine. Aldrich barely flinched. "You're getting good at this," he observed dryly as Kael dressed the wound. "Practice makes perfect. Or makes monsters." But the king's eyes held something that might have been approval. With 3 samples in hand, Kael and Corvain began the real work. They spent 20 straight hours at the microscope, comparing cellular structures, documenting differences, searching for the pattern that would explain why the king's immune system had turned murderous. It was Corvain who spotted it first. "Here," he said, gesturing for Kael to look. "The healthy tissue. See these protein markers on the cell walls?" Kael adjusted the focus. The markers were there, subtle but present like flags identifying the cell as belonging to the body. "Now look at the inflamed tissue." Kael switched slides. The protein markers were different, not absent, but changed, distorted somehow, their structure altered. "It's like the cells are wearing the wrong uniform," Kael murmured. "The immune system doesn't recognize them as friendly." "But what's changing the markers?" Corvain pulled up his journals, flipping through pages. "It has to be something environmental, some trigger that's altering cellular protein expression." They tested every variable they could think of: diet, stress, exposure to different materials. Nothing fit the pattern. Until Kael remembered something from Mira's journal, an offhand comment from a healer about the king's condition worsening during winter months. "Temperature," he said suddenly. "What if it's temperature dependent?" Corvain looked up sharply. "Cold makes the condition worse." "Not cold, heat." Kael grabbed the journal with temperature readings. "Look at when the crashes happen. Not randomly. They correlate with elevated body temperature, but not just during the crashes, before them. Slight increases in baseline temperature, maybe from exertion or stress, or just fluctuation, trigger the protein changes. The immune system responds. The response causes inflammation, which raises temperature further, which accelerates the protein changes, which intensifies the immune response. A feedback loop." Corvain's eyes widened. Once it starts, it can't stop until the body exhausts itself fighting. And then it stabilizes, temperature drops, the proteins return to normal, and everything resets until the next trigger. They stared at each other across the cluttered table. "If that's true," Corvain said slowly, "then the solution isn't to stop the immune response. It's to prevent the temperature spikes that trigger the protein changes. Can we do that?" "Maybe." Corvain was already moving, pulling books from shelves. "There are compounds that regulate body temperature, prevent fluctuation, normally used for fever management, but if we adjusted the dosage, administered it consistently to maintain constant baseline temperature, would it work?" I have no idea. Corvain's smile was slightly manic. But we're going to find out. They had 2 days left. Cale found the king in his chambers, attempting to read despite the pain that still lingered from the last crash. Aldrich set down the book when Cale entered. You have that look, the king said. The one that means you're about to propose something that will either save my life or kill me outright. Cale explained the theory, the temperature connection, the proposed treatment. Aldrich listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. When Cale finished, silence stretched between them. So your solution, Aldrich said finally, is to keep my body temperature artificially stable, indefinitely. Until we can find a way to retrain your immune system to tolerate the protein variations, or until we identify what's causing the temperature fluctuations in the first place. And if this fails, if Corvain's temperature-regulating compound doesn't work, or has unforeseen side effects, or simply postpones the inevitable, then we're no worse off than we are now, Cale said. But if it works, I might actually survive. Aldrich leaned back against his pillows, looking suddenly very tired. Do you know what the hardest part of dying is, Cale Thorne? No, Your Majesty. Hope. The word came out bitter. Every new healer, every new treatment, every promise of a cure, they all bring hope. And hope hurts worse than any physical pain when it's ripped away. His eyes met Cale's. You're asking me to hope again. After 5 years of learning not to. Cale understood then what he was really asking. Not just permission to try an experimental treatment. Permission to matter. Permission to be more than another doomed attempt. I can't promise success, Cale said quietly. But I can promise I won't stop fighting for you. Not in 2 days. Not ever. Even if this fails, we'll find another approach. And another, until something works or until I die anyway. Aldrich's smile was sad. You're either a fool or a saint, Wolf. I haven't decided which. Neither. Just stubborn. The king's laugh turned into a cough, harsh and wet. When he recovered, he nodded once. Do it. Mix your compounds, say your prayers if you have any, and we'll see if stubbornness is enough to cheat death. Cale and Corvain spent the remaining time preparing the treatment with obsessive care. The temperature-regulating compound had to be precisely calibrated. Too much would lower the king's body temperature to dangerous levels. Too little would allow the fluctuations that triggered the cascade. They tested it on Corvain first, monitoring his response over 6 hours. The compound worked, maintaining steady temperature within a narrow range. Now we try it on someone dying, Corvain said, carefully measuring out the king's dose. If this kills him, at least he died trying instead of rotting slowly. Inspirational words. I'm a physician, not a poet. They administered the first dose that evening. The king took it without complaint, then settled back to wait. How long until we know if it works? He asked. Days, maybe weeks, Corvain admitted. We need to see if you can go through a normal trigger period without crashing. Wonderful. More waiting. But the waiting revealed results faster than expected. The king's baseline temperature stabilized within 12 hours, holding steady even when he exerted himself walking around his chambers. 48 hours passed with no crash. Then 72. The fortress began to notice. Servants whispered that the king looked better, walked straighter, spoke with more energy. Courtiers who'd been jockeying for position in the inevitable succession suddenly found themselves reconsidering. On the morning of the 7th day, Cale's deadline, King Aldrich walked into Corvain's office without assistance. The physician looked up from his notes, his expression cycling through shock, hope, and professional skepticism in rapid succession. Your Majesty, he managed, you're walking. Brilliant observation. But Aldrich's eyes were bright, his color better than it had been in months. The pain hasn't vanished, but it's manageable. Tolerable, even. He turned to Cale. You did it. You actually did it. We did it, Cale corrected, looking at Corvain. I had the theory. He had the expertise to make it real. How touching. Aldrich moved to the window, gazing out over his fortress. Now comes the interesting part. You've saved my life, Cale Thorne. The question is, what do I do with you now? King Aldrich turned from the window, studying him with those sharp eyes that had regained their predatory edge. You understand the position you've put me in? Not really. Then let me explain. Aldrich moved to Corvain's desk, leaning against it with an ease that would have been impossible a week ago. For 5 years, my court has been preparing for my death. Alliances formed, territories promised, deals struck. Half my generals have already chosen which faction they'll support when the crown falls. My treasury master has been quietly moving assets into accounts I'm not supposed to know about. Even my personal guard, he glanced at the door. Even they've been taking bribes to ensure their loyalty transfers smoothly when the time comes. Corvain's face had gone pale. Your Majesty, I had no idea. Of course you didn't. You were too busy trying to keep me alive to notice the vultures circling. Aldrich's smile was cold. But I noticed. I've had nothing to do for 5 years except notice. And now suddenly, I'm not dying anymore. Which means all those carefully laid plans, all those promises and deals and treacheries, they're all worthless. They'll be angry, Cale said slowly, understanding dawning. They'll be furious. Aldrich pushed off the desk, pacing now with renewed energy. And they'll blame you. The outsider who ruined everything by having the audacity to succeed where everyone else failed. Let them blame me. I've been blamed for worse. Have you? Aldrich's gaze was penetrating. Have you been blamed by people with armies, with assassins, with the resources to make you disappear in ways that would make your alpha's betrayal look merciful? The room went very quiet. What are you saying? Kael asked. I'm saying you saved my life, which means I owe you a debt. But I'm also saying that debt might get you killed. Aldrich moved closer, his voice dropping. The smart move would be to send you back to your alpha, claim the treatment failed, let everyone believe I'm still dying. Then I could quietly continue the compound, maintain the illusion until I've had time to reorganize my court. But you won't do that, Kael said, surprised by his own certainty. No, I won't. Aldrich's expression shifted into something harder. Because I'm tired of pretending to be weak. Tired of watching traitors smile to my face while planning my funeral. You gave me my strength back, Wolf. I intend to use it. A knock at the door interrupted them. Senna entered without waiting for permission, her face grim. Your Majesty, the council is demanding an audience. They've heard rumors. Let me guess. Rumors that I'm recovering? Aldrich's smile was sharp as broken glass. How convenient. Tell them I'll see them in the throne room. 1 hour. Your Majesty, if I might suggest, 1 hour, Commander, and have the wolf attend as well. Let's see how brave they are when confronted with their failure. After Senna left, Corvain cleared his throat. This is a mistake. The council will see it as a challenge. They'll show their true colors, which is exactly what I want. Aldrich turned to Kael. Can you defend yourself in a fight? Kael almost laughed. Not even slightly. Pity. Stay close to Senna then, and whatever happens in that throne room, don't back down. These people are predators. They can smell weakness from a mile away. The hour passed too quickly. Kael found himself in a side chamber adjacent to the throne room, watching through a crack in the door as the council members arrived. They were everything he'd expected from Aldrich's description. Hard faces, expensive clothes, the kind of casual arrogance that came from decades of power. That's Lord Varen, Senna murmured beside him, pointing to a heavy-set man with iron-gray hair. Controls the northern territories. Been angling for independence for years, waiting for the king to die so he can make his move. And the woman in green? Lady Thessia. Runs the southern trade routes. She's already negotiating with neighboring kingdoms, promising them favorable terms once she's in charge of a fractured realm. They're not even hiding it? Why would they? Until today, the king was supposed to be too weak to care. Senna's expression was troubled. This is going to get ugly. King Aldrich entered the throne room like a storm given human form. He moved with purpose, his stride strong and sure, and the council members' faces cycled through shock, fear, and poorly concealed rage in rapid succession. Kael followed behind with Senna, trying to look more confident than he felt. Aldrich settled into his throne, a massive thing carved from black stone, inlaid with silver, and surveyed his council with obvious disdain. You look surprised to see me walking, he observed. Should I be offended? Lord Varen recovered first, dropping into a low bow that fooled exactly no one. Your Majesty, we're delighted by your miraculous recovery. Truly, it's... Save it. Aldrich's voice cut like a whip. I know what you are, Varen. I know about your meetings with the northern clans, your promises of autonomy, your plans to carve out your own kingdom the moment my body was cold. Varen's face went pale. Around the room, other council members shifted uncomfortably. And you, Thessia, Aldrich continued, his gaze swinging to the woman in green. Did you really think I wouldn't notice you signing trade agreements dated for 2 months from now? Rather presumptuous, considering I wasn't scheduled to die until at least spring. Lady Thessia's hand moved toward the knife at her belt, then stopped. The guards along the walls had straightened, hands on their weapons. Your Majesty, she said carefully, you've been ill. Perhaps you've misunderstood. I've been dying. There's a difference, and it gave me plenty of time to watch you all prepare to tear my kingdom apart. Aldrich leaned forward. But here's the interesting thing. I'm not dying anymore, which means all your plans, all your secret deals, all your careful positioning, it's all worthless now. The silence in the throne room was absolute. Then Lord Varen spoke, his voice low and dangerous. And what do we owe this sudden recovery to, Your Majesty? Some miracle cure that conveniently appears just when you need it most? Not a miracle. Medicine. And expertise. Aldrich gestured toward Kael. This is Kael Thorn, sent to me by Alpha Garon as part of our treaty negotiations. He identified my condition and developed a treatment where all of you, his gaze swept the council, gave me up for dead. Every eye in the room turned to Kael. The weight of their attention felt physical, suffocating. A wolf, Varen said, his tone dripping contempt. You're telling us a frontier wolf succeeded where the kingdom's greatest physicians failed? He did. Corvain's voice came from the doorway. The physician entered, carrying a leather folder. I have all the documentation here. Cellular analysis, treatment protocols, temperature monitoring. The condition was autoimmune in nature, triggered by temperature fluctuation. Once we stabilized His Majesty's baseline temperature, the cascade effect stopped. How convenient, Lady Thessia said. And how long until this treatment stops working? Until the king relapses and we're back where we started? That's the question, isn't it? Another council member stepped forward, younger than the others, with a scarred face and cold eyes. Perhaps this wolf's cure is temporary. Perhaps it's poison disguised as medicine, designed to give the king false hope before killing him slowly. Lord Garrett makes an interesting point, Varen added. How do we know this outsider isn't working for enemies of the crown? The treatment could be part of a longer game. Kael felt the trap closing around him. They weren't questioning the science, they were questioning his motives, his loyalty, his right to exist in their political landscape, and they were doing it in a way that made him the threat, not them. The wolf saved my life, Aldrich said, his voice dangerously quiet. If anyone here has a problem with that, they're welcome to challenge his methods. Corvain will provide all documentation for review. That's not necessary, Your Majesty, Lord Garrett said smoothly. We're merely concerned for your welfare. Surely you understand our caution, given the unusual circumstances. What I understand is that you're angry I'm still breathing. Aldrich stood, and the casual violence in the movement made several council members step back. But let me be clear, I am breathing, I am healed, and I am done tolerating treason disguised as concern. Your Majesty. Varen's voice had taken on a harder edge. You speak of treason, but we've served this kingdom faithfully. You've served yourselves, and you've gotten comfortable doing it because I was too weak to stop you. Aldrich descended from the throne, moving among them like a predator selecting prey. But that ends today. The treaties you signed without my authorization? Voided. The territory agreements? Cancelled. The trade deals promising my resources to foreign kingdoms? Renegotiated. You can't, Thessia began. I can. I am. And if anyone here has objections, Aldrich's smile was terrifying. Well, there's the door. Leave now and I'll be merciful. Exile instead of execution. Stay and you serve me loyally from this moment forward. Choose. Nobody moved. Then Lord Garrett laughed, short and sharp. Your Majesty, with all due respect, you're one man. Healed, yes, but still one man. And this council represents the real power in your kingdom. The armies, the resources, the territories. You might be able to walk again, but that doesn't change the fundamental reality. You need us more than we need you. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Is that a threat, Garrett? Aldrich asked softly. It's a fact. Garrett spread his hands. We've all made arrangements, protected our interests, and while we're delighted by your recovery, we're not prepared to simply hand back power we've spent 5 years consolidating. He glanced at Kale, especially not because some frontier wolf played healer for a week. Kale saw it happening in slow motion, the shift from political maneuvering to open rebellion. Saw the other council members' faces harden as they realized Garrett had said what they were all thinking. Saw Senna's hand move to her sword hilt. Saw King Aldrich smile like a wolf who'd finally been given permission to hunt. Thank you, Garrett, Aldrich said. I was wondering which of you would be stupid enough to make the first move. He raised his voice. Guards! The doors burst open. But it wasn't the throne room guards who entered. It was a different unit, wearing black and silver, moving with military precision. Kyle recognized them from his arrival at the fortress. These were the king's personal soldiers, the ones who'd never wavered. Arrest Lord Garrett, Aldrich commanded. Charge, treason against the crown. Garrett's hand flew to his sword, but Senna was faster. She had him disarmed and on his knees before he could draw. The black and silver guards surrounded him, weapons drawn. Your Majesty, Varen said quickly, his face pale. Lord Garrett spoke out of turn, but surely execution isn't... I said arrest, not execute, though that can change depending on how cooperative everyone becomes. Aldrich's gaze swept the council. Anyone else want to discuss the fundamental reality of power in my kingdom? Silence. Good. Then here's how this works. Garrett goes to the dungeons while we investigate exactly how deep his treason runs. The rest of you will provide Corvain with complete documentation of every agreement, every treaty, every deal you've made in the last 5 years. Everything gets reviewed. Anything that violates the crown's authority gets voided. And if I find out anyone's been hiding things... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Lady Thessia was the first to bow. Of course, Your Majesty. We live to serve. The others followed, dropping into submission with varying degrees of grace. But Kyle could see it in their eyes. This wasn't over. Aldrich had won this round, but he'd also declared war on his entire power structure. And Kale was standing right in the middle of it. The council was dismissed. Garrett was dragged away, shouting about rights and due process that everyone knew didn't apply to treason. The throne room emptied until only Aldrich, Senna, Corvain, and Kale remained. That was either brilliant or suicidal, Senna said. I haven't decided which. Both. Aldrich moved to a side table, pouring himself wine with hands that shook slightly. The display of strength had cost him. They needed to know I'm back, that I won't tolerate the slow dissolution of everything I built. They'll come for you now, Corvain warned, not openly, but in shadows. Assassins, poison, accidents. Let them try. Aldrich drained the cup. I've survived worse than frightened bureaucrats. What about Kael? Senna asked. They see him as the catalyst. If they can't reach you directly, they'll come for me instead, Kael finished. Use my death to weaken you. Make the cure seem temporary or dangerous. Aldrich set down his cup, considering. I could send you back to your alpha, complete the treaty, get you to safety. You know that's not safety. Kael's voice was flat. Garen sent me here to die. If I go back alive and you're healed, he'll see me as a failed investment. My father would be killed as punishment for your success. Yes, I understand frontier politics. Aldrich began to pace again, his mind clearly working through options. So sending you home isn't viable. Keeping you here makes you a target. Unless what? The king stopped pacing, turning to face Kael with an expression of dawning calculation. Unless we make you too valuable to kill, too connected to my recovery to eliminate without consequences. How? By making you my official royal physician. Corvain choked on air. Your Majesty, with all due respect, he's not actually a physician. He's a strategist who got lucky. He's the person who saved my life when every actual physician failed. Aldrich's tone brooked no argument. And he's the only one who fully understands the treatment keeping me alive. If something happens to him, I'm back to dying slowly. The council knows that. It makes him essential. It also makes him a massive target, Senna pointed out. Every faction that wants you dead will see him as the key. Kill Kael, and you're vulnerable again. which is why he'll have constant protection. Your best guard, Senna, rotating shifts, no patterns, absolute loyalty. Aldrich turned back to Kael. It's not perfect. You'll be living with a knife to your throat every moment, but at least you'll be living. Kael's mind raced through the implications. Royal physician meant status, protection, resources. But it also meant permanent entanglement in court politics he barely understood. It meant painting a target on his back that would never fade. It meant accepting that his life in the frontier packs was over, that he could never go home. Then again, home had traded him away like property. What was there to go back to? I accept, he said. Good. Aldrich's smile was sharp. Welcome to the nightmare, Physician Thorne. Try not to die in this first week. The next 3 days were chaos. Kael moved into quarters adjacent to the king's chambers, larger rooms than before, but with guards posted outside his door at all hours. Corvain began training him in actual medical procedures, cramming years of knowledge into exhausting sessions that left Kael's head spinning. You need to at least look like you know what you're doing, Corvain muttered, showing him how to properly bandage a wound. Royal Physician is a title that carries expectations. I'm aware. Are you? Because half the court thinks you're a charlatan, and the other half thinks you're a threat. You can't afford mistakes. But the real education came from watching the court's reaction. People who'd ignored Kael's existence now watched his every move. Servants whispered when he passed. Guards studied him with professional assessment, trying to determine if he was worth defending or worth killing. And the council members, they smiled. That was what worried Kael most. Lord Varen smiled and bowed and congratulated him on his new position. Lady Thessia sent a gift, an expensive medical text, beautifully bound, with a note expressing her hope that he'd continue serving the king well. They're planning something, Senna said when Kael showed her the book. She flipped through it carefully, checking for poison, hidden blades, anything suspicious. Thessia doesn't give gifts without reason. Maybe she's trying to make peace? Or she's establishing a pattern of friendly contact so that when something happens to you, she can claim innocence. Senna set down the book. Trust no one, Kael. Not the servants, not the guards, not anyone who isn't in this room right now. That night, Kael couldn't sleep. He stood at his window, looking out over the fortress, and wondered what he'd actually won. A title? Safety? Or just a different kind of cage? A soft knock at his door. Kael tensed, but it was just one of Senna's guards. A woman named Lyra, with sharp eyes and scars on her hands. Physician Thorne, the king requests your presence. He's having temperature fluctuations. Kael grabbed his medical bag, a gift from Corvain, filled with the essential supplies, and followed Lyra through the darkened corridors. They passed 2 more guard checkpoints before reaching the king's chambers. Inside, Aldrich sat on the edge of his bed, looking pale. Sweat beaded on his forehead. How bad? Kael asked, already pulling out the thermometer. Not a crash. Not yet. But I can feel it starting. That heat building in my joints. Aldrich's jaw was tight. The compound should have prevented this. Kael took his temperature. Slightly elevated, but not dangerously so. When did you take the last dose? This morning, same as always. Any changes to your routine, stress, exertion, anything different? Aldrich's laugh was bitter. You mean, besides declaring war on my own council and arresting one of the most powerful lords in the kingdom? No, nothing stressful at all. Stress can trigger temperature increases independent of physical illness. Kael checked Aldrich's pulse. Fast, but steady. We might need to adjust your dosage, higher concentration during high stress periods. Or this could be the beginning of the end. Your miracle cure finally failing. It's not failing. Your body is just adapting to new circumstances. Kael prepared an additional dose of the temperature-regulating compound. This should stabilize you, but you need to actually rest. Stop trying to rebuild your kingdom in 3 days. I don't have time to rest. If I show weakness now, if you crash again, they'll see it as proof that you're still vulnerable. Is that the message you want to send? Aldrich took the medicine, then leaned back against his pillows. You're getting bold, physician. Most people don't interrupt me. Most people aren't trying to keep you alive. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Aldrich spoke, his voice quieter. Do you know why I really gave you this title? to make me too valuable to kill. That's part of it, but also, the king's eyes were distant. For 5 years, everyone around me has been preparing for my death, planning for it, profiting from it, accepting it as inevitable. You're the first person in half a decade who looked at me and saw someone worth saving instead of someone to be managed until the end. Kael didn't know what to say to that. The compound is working, he said finally, but you need to give it time, and you need to stop pushing yourself so hard. I can't. The moment I stop pushing, they'll push back, and they'll win. A commotion outside interrupted them. Raised voices, the sound of running feet. Senna burst through the door, her expression grim. We have a problem, she said. Lord Garrett escaped from the dungeons, and the guard who was supposed to be watching him is dead. Aldrich was on his feet instantly, all signs of fatigue vanishing. How? Someone gave him keys and weapons. Professional work. The guard's throat was cut before he could raise an alarm. Senna's hand rested on her sword. Garrett's gone, and he's taken 3 other prisoners with him. Political prisoners who were arrested for treason during your illness. He's not running, Kael said suddenly. He's organizing. Both Aldrich and Senna turned to stare at him. Think about it, Kael continued. If he just wanted to escape, he'd leave alone. Taking others means he's building a force. He'll go to his supporters, use his escape as proof that the king is too weak to hold power, and rally them for an open challenge. Aldrich's face had gone hard. Senna, mobilize the loyal units. I want every known Garrett sympathizer under surveillance. And seal the fortress. No one in or out without my personal authorization. Your Majesty, if we lock down the fortress, we're confirming their suspicions that you're afraid. I am afraid, but I'm also smart enough to know when I'm under attack. Aldrich moved to his armor stand, beginning to dress for battle. They wanted to know if I'm still the king who built this fortress. Let's show them. The next hours were a blur of organized chaos. Soldiers mobilized throughout the fortress, taking defensive positions. Senna's intelligence network went into overdrive, tracking rumors and whispers, trying to determine how many council members were involved in Garrett's escape. The answer, it turned out, was most of them. At least 6 members of the council helped coordinate this, Senna reported as dawn broke. Maybe more. They're calling it a rescue, but everyone knows what it really is, the opening move of a coup. What's Garrett's next play? Aldrich asked. He'd been up all night, coordinating defenses, and his face showed the strain. Unknown. He could gather forces and lay siege. He could try to assassinate you directly. Or, Senna paused, he could go public, claim you're unfit to rule, that your recovery is a lie maintained by foreign magic and a charlatan physician. All eyes turned to Kael. I'm the weak link, he said. If they can discredit me, they discredit your recovery. They'd need proof, Corvain said. Medical evidence, testimony, something concrete. They'll manufacture it if they have to. Aldrich's expression was troubled. The question is how to counter it before they can act. We go on offense, Kael said. We prove the cure works before they can claim it doesn't. How? An idea was forming in Kael's mind. Dangerous, possibly suicidal, but it might work. You said the council represents the real power in the kingdom. Armies, resources, territories. What if we bypass them entirely? I'm listening. The people, the common soldiers, the servants, the merchants. They don't care about political maneuvering. They care about stability. About having a strong king who can keep the kingdom safe. Kael's words came faster as the plan solidified. What if you address them directly? Show them you're healed. Let them see with their own eyes that you're not dying. A public appearance, Senna said slowly, in the main courtyard, where everyone can witness. It's risky, Corvain warned. If something goes wrong, if you show any weakness, then we lose anyway. Aldrich's smile was sharp. But if it works, we undercut Garrett's entire strategy. Hard to claim the king is dying when he's standing in front of 1,000 witnesses looking healthier than he has in years. They'll try to stop you, Kael said. Or worse, they'll try to make you fail publicly. Poison, hidden weapons, anything to cause a dramatic collapse. So we prepare for everything. Aldrich turned to Senna. Announce a public address for tomorrow at noon. Make it seem routine, a formal statement about Garrett's escape and the crown's response. But position our most loyal soldiers throughout the crowd. Anyone makes a move, they go down hard. What about Kael? Senna asked. If you're presenting him as your royal physician, he'll need to be there, and he'll be a target. He stands beside me, Aldrich said firmly. Let them see who saved their king. Let them see the person Garrett and his allies want dead. Kael felt something cold settle in his stomach. This was it, the moment where he became a symbol instead of a person, where his survival became entangled with a kingdom's future. What if they succeed? He asked quietly. What if someone does manage to kill me tomorrow? Aldrich's gaze was steady. Then I make sure your death costs them everything. The rest of the day was spent preparing. Corvain checked and rechecked Aldrich's medication levels. Senna coordinated security with paranoid thoroughness. And Kael tried to wrap his mind around the fact that in less than 24 hours, he'd be standing in front of hostile nobles and potentially hostile soldiers, asking them to believe in a cure they wanted to fail. That evening, a message arrived from outside the fortress. A merchant's runner, carrying a sealed letter addressed to Kael Thorne. The guards brought it to him unopened. Kael broke the seal, recognizing the handwriting immediately. It was from Mira. Kael, word reached us that you're alive and serving as royal physician. Garen is furious. He's calling you a traitor, claiming you seduced the king with false cures to gain power. He's already sent messages to neighboring pacts trying to build support for action against Blackridge Hold. I don't know what his endgame is, but it's not good. Your father is safe for now, but I'm watching over him. Don't trust anyone. And please be careful. Kael read the letter 3 times, then burned it in the brazier. Garen was making his move, which meant Kael couldn't go home even if he wanted to. The Alpha had already written him off as a threat, which meant his father was a bargaining chip at best, a casualty at worst. He was trapped, not by Aldrich's title or the council's schemes, but by the simple fact that he'd succeeded when he was supposed to fail. And success, in this world, was apparently more dangerous than failure. A knock at the door. Lyra again, her expression tense. Physician Thorne, you should see this. She led him to a window overlooking the outer walls. In the fading light, Kael could see movement in the hills beyond the fortress. Campfires, lots of them, spread out in a rough semicircle. Garrett's forces, Lyra said. They've been gathering since nightfall. Best estimate, 500 soldiers, maybe more. That's not a rescue party, Kael murmured. That's an army. Garrett's called in every favor, every alliance. He's planning to lay siege. Lyra's voice was grim. And he's timed it perfectly, right before the king's public address. If Aldrich appears weak while under siege, it undermines everything. But if he cancels, it looks like fear. Does the king know? He's the one who sent me to get you. He wants you in the war room. Boom! The war room was exactly what it sounded like. A massive chamber filled with maps, troop positions, supply calculations. Aldrich stood at the center table, surrounded by his remaining loyal commanders. He looked up as Kael entered. Garrett's moved faster than expected, he said without preamble. He's got numbers, but not enough to actually breach the fortress. This is theater, a show of force designed to make tomorrow's address impossible. So we cancel? One of the commanders asked. We do not. Aldrich's finger jabbed at the map. We proceed exactly as planned. Let Garrett sit out there and watch me prove I'm not dying. Your Majesty, with respect, an active siege is hardly the ideal backdrop for a demonstration of strength. It's the perfect backdrop. It shows I'm not afraid of him or his rebellion. Aldrich's eyes burned with the same fierce intensity Kael had seen on that first day. We address the people at noon tomorrow, and then once we've secured their loyalty, we deal with Garrett permanently. The meeting continued late into the night, discussing defensive positions, supply lines, contingency plans. Kael contributed where he could, his strategic mind falling into familiar patterns despite the unfamiliar context. Finally, around midnight, Aldrich dismissed everyone except Kael and Senna. Tomorrow determines everything, he said, exhaustion finally showing in his voice. If we succeed, we break the coup before it fully forms. If we fail, we won't fail, Senna said firmly. You can't promise that. No, but I can promise we'll make them regret trying. She glanced at Kael. Both of us will. After Senna left, Kael prepared Aldrich's evening dose of the compound. The king's hands shook slightly as he took it, the first real sign of fear Kael had seen from him. "I built this kingdom with blood and steel," Aldrich said quietly. "Spent 20 years fighting for every inch of territory, every treaty, every alliance, and now it might all fall apart because I made the mistake of trusting the wrong people." "You didn't make a mistake," Kael said. "They did. They forgot who they were dealing with." "Did they? Or did I forget? 5 years of weakness changes you, Kael. Makes you doubt yourself. Makes you wonder if maybe they're right. Maybe you are too broken to lead." "You're not broken. You're healing. There's a difference." Aldrich's smile was sad. "I hope you're right, because tomorrow we'll find out if this kingdom still wants me leading it." Kael returned to his quarters but didn't sleep. He sat by the window watching the campfires in the hills and thought about everything that had led to this moment. Being traded away, meeting a dying king, finding a cure, becoming a target. Somewhere out there, Garrett was planning his next move. And inside the fortress, other council members were probably doing the same. They all wanted the same thing. Aldrich removed from power, the kingdom carved up among themselves, and Kael dead as proof that the cure had never been real. The only thing standing between them and success was tomorrow's address. No pressure. Dawn came too quickly. Kael dressed in the formal robes Corvain had provided, black trimmed with silver, marking him as royal physician. The fabric felt heavy, constricting, like wearing someone else's identity. Senna's guards escorted him to Aldrich's chambers. The king was already dressed in full ceremonial armor, not just for show, Kael realized, but actual protection, expecting an attack. "Ready?" Aldrich asked. "Not even slightly." "Good. Confidence would make you careless." The king checked his sword, making sure it moved freely in its sheath. "Remember, stand tall, don't show fear, and if someone tries to kill you, get behind me. I didn't save you from your alpha just to watch you die for my kingdom." They walked through the fortress together, gathering their procession. Corvain joined them, looking pale but determined. Senna and 20 of her best guards formed a protective square around them. Other loyal soldiers lined the route, watching for threats. The main courtyard was packed. Soldiers, servants, merchants, craftsmen, everyone who lived and worked at Blackridge Hold had turned out to see their king. The crowd parted as Aldrich approached the raised platform at the center, and on the walls, archers, both Aldrich's and Kael suspected Garrett's sympathizers who'd managed to infiltrate the guard rotations. Aldrich mounted the platform. Kael followed, his heart hammering against his ribs. From this height, he could see the enemy campfires in the hills beyond the walls, could see faces in the crowd, some hopeful, some hostile, most just uncertain. King Aldrich raised his hand for silence. The crowd quieted instantly. 5 years ago, he began, his voice carrying across the courtyard with practiced authority, I fell ill. My body betrayed me, and I became a shadow of the king you once knew. Many of you prepared for my death. Some of you even hoped for it. Uncomfortable shifting in the crowd. But I didn't die. Because this man, Aldrich gestured to Kael, refused to accept the inevitable. Kael Thorne, sent to me as part of a treaty negotiation, saw what everyone else missed. He identified my condition, developed a treatment, and saved my life when every physician in the kingdom had given up. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, not entirely positive. I know some of you doubt this recovery. Some of you think it's temporary, or false, or a trick designed to maintain my grip on power. Aldrich's smile was sharp. So let me be clear. I am healed. I am strong. And I am still your king. He drew his sword in one smooth motion, the blade catching sunlight. Then he descended from the platform and walked directly into the crowd. Kael's breath caught. This wasn't part of the plan. Aldrich was making himself vulnerable, proving his strength by exposing himself to potential attack. The crowd parted uncertainly. Aldrich moved among them, his sword still drawn but pointed down, a symbol, not a threat. He stopped in front of an old soldier, scarred and missing 2 fingers. You served under me in the northern campaigns, Aldrich said. Do I look like a dying man to you? The soldier stared, then slowly shook his head. No, your majesty, you look like the king who led us to victory. Then spread the word. Aldrich moved on, finding a merchant woman. You supply the fortress with grain. Have my orders been unclear? Have I shown weakness in our negotiations? No, Your Majesty, you've been sharp as ever. Person after person, Aldrich confronted them directly, forcing them to acknowledge his recovery. And slowly, gradually, the mood of the crowd shifted. Uncertainty became acceptance. Doubt became belief. Then someone screamed. Kael saw it happening in slow motion. A figure pushing through the crowd, weapon raised. Not aimed at Aldrich, but at Kael himself. The blade caught the light as it descended. Senna was faster. She intercepted the attacker, her sword taking him through the chest before his weapon could reach Kael. The man fell, blood spreading across the courtyard stones. The crowd erupted into chaos. More attackers emerged, 4, 5, 6 of them, all targeting either Aldrich or Kael. Senna's guards moved with brutal efficiency, cutting them down. But the damage was done. The peaceful demonstration had turned into a massacre. Aldrich's voice cut through the panic. Hold! The crowd froze. These assassins, Aldrich said, gesturing to the bodies, were sent by those who fear my recovery, who profit from my weakness, who would rather see me dead than see me strong. He turned slowly, addressing every section of the crowd. Lord Garrett sits in those hills, waiting for me to fail, waiting for this cure to prove false, waiting for his chance to tear this kingdom apart. Kael's ears were ringing. He'd come within inches of death, could still feel the displaced air from the blade that had nearly taken his head. But I will not fail, Aldrich continued. I will not die, and I will not let traitors destroy what I built. He raised his sword again, and this time it was definitely a threat. Garrett has until sunset to surrender. After that, we ride out and end this rebellion permanently. The crowd roared approval. Whether from genuine loyalty or fear, Kael couldn't tell, but the sound was deafening. As guards escorted them back to the fortress, Kael's hands finally started shaking. The adrenaline crash hit him all at once, and he had to lean against a wall to keep from collapsing. You all right? Senna asked, blood still on her sword. Someone just tried to kill me. Several someones. You're adapting to court life quickly. Her expression softened slightly. You did well. Didn't panic, didn't run. Most people fold the first time someone tries to murder them. Is there usually a second time? In my experience? Always. Back in Aldrich's chambers, Corvain examined the king with shaking hands. Your temperature is elevated, the stress, the exertion. I'm fine. But Aldrich's face was pale, sweat beading on his forehead. Just need the afternoon dose early. Kael prepared it, his own hand steadier now, muscle memory taking over. As Aldrich drank the compound, Kael noticed something that made his blood run cold. The liquid was the wrong color, just slightly, barely perceptible, but wrong. Don't swallow, he said sharply. Aldrich stopped, eyes widening. He spat the mixture into a basin, coughing. Corvain grabbed the vial, sniffing it carefully. His face went white. Someone's tampered with it, added something. I'm not sure what, but the chemical signature is off. Poison? Senna demanded. Maybe. Or something designed to trigger another crash, make it look like the treatment is failing. Corvain was already moving to his equipment, preparing tests. If the king had swallowed this during the address in front of all those witnesses, it would have destroyed everything, Kael finished. Proved Garrett right. Shown the cure was temporary. They all looked at the vial of corrupted medicine. Someone in the fortress did this, Aldrich said quietly. Someone with access to the compound, to my chambers, to Kael's workspace. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing, Corvain added. This wasn't random. This was surgical, targeted. Senna's expression had gone cold and dangerous. I'll find them. No, Aldrich said. Let them think they succeeded. Let them believe I'm about to crash again. His smile was terrible. And then we'll see who celebrates my failure. The trap was set. They prepared a substitute compound, identical to the real one, but harmless. Aldrich made a show of taking it, then retired to his chambers as if feeling unwell. Within 2 hours, word had spread through the fortress. The king was declining again. The cure had failed after all, and someone sent a message to Garrett's camp. Senna's spies intercepted it. The messenger was a young guard, nervous and stupid, carrying a note sealed with Lady Thessia's mark. The wolf's cure has failed. The king will crash before nightfall. Proceed as planned. Proceed with what? Kael asked. The answer came at sunset. Garrett's army attacked. Not the fortress itself. They didn't have the numbers for a successful siege, but they hit the outer defenses hard, drawing soldiers away from the main keep, creating chaos, making it impossible to defend both the walls and the inner fortress simultaneously. And in that chaos, more assassins struck. They came for Kael first, 4 of them, wearing guard uniforms, moving through the corridors with practiced silence. Senna's loyalists intercepted them, and the fighting was brief and brutal. 2 attackers dead, 2 captured. Then they came for Corvain. The physician was in his office working on identifying the poison in the corrupted compound when someone set the room on fire. He barely escaped, losing years of research and medical supplies to the flames. And finally, they came for Aldrich. 6 assassins, disguised as servants, carrying weapons designed to look like cleaning supplies. They made it all the way to the king's chambers before Senna's inner guard cut them down. But the last one got through. Kael heard the scream and ran. Arrived at Aldrich's chambers to find the king on the floor, a knife buried in his side just below the armor line. Blood spreading across the stone. The assassin dead nearby, Senna standing over the body with murder in her eyes. "No," Kael breathed, dropping to his knees beside Aldrich. "No, no, no! I'm all right," Aldrich gasped, though his face was gray with pain. "Missed anything vital, I think." Kael's hands moved on autopsy, examining the wound. The blade had gone deep, angled up beneath the ribs. But Aldrich was right. By sheer luck or divine intervention, it had missed the major organs. "Corvain!" Kael shouted. "I need—" "His office is on fire," Senna said. "All his equipment, his supplies." "Then get whatever wasn't burned. And boil water, clean cloths, anything we can use." Kael was already removing Aldrich's armor, exposing the wound fully. "This has to be stitched now, or he'll bleed out." For the next hour, Kael worked with shaking hands and improvised tools to close the wound that should have killed the king. Senna brought him what supplies she could salvage. Other guards held Aldrich down while Kael stitched, because there was no time for painkillers, no time for proper anesthetic. Aldrich never screamed, just bit down on a leather strap and endured while Kael sewed his flesh back together with all the skill of someone who'd never actually done this before and was making it up as he went. When it was finally done, bandaged and cleaned as well as possible, Kael sat back against the wall and tried not to vomit. "Is he going to live?" Senna asked. "I don't know. If infection sets in, if the wound reopens, if—" Kael stopped himself. "I don't know." Aldrich's eyes opened, unfocused but aware. "The compound still working. Your temperature is stable." Kael checked quickly, relief flooding through him. "The wound won't trigger a cascade, but you need to stay still. Let it heal." "Can't." Aldrich tried to sit up, winced, fell back. "Garrett will see this as his opening." "Let him." Senna's voice was cold steel. "I've had enough of playing defense. It's time we reminded them why you're king." She left the room, issuing orders. Within minutes, Kael could hear the fortress mobilizing, not defensively, but for attack. "What's she doing?" he asked. Aldrich's smile was pained but genuine. "Exactly what I would do. Garrett thinks I'm dying in here. Thinks his assassins succeeded. His coup is working. Senna's going to show him how wrong he is. You can't ride out. You can barely stand." "I don't need to ride. That's what commanders are for." Aldrich's hand found Kael's arm, gripping with surprising strength. "But I need you to keep me alive long enough to see this through. Can you do that?" Kael looked at the man who'd given him a purpose when he was supposed to die, who'd trusted him with impossible problems and believed in him when no one else did, who'd made him royal physician not because he deserved it, but because Aldrich needed him to survive. "Yes," Kael said, "I can do that." Through the window, he could see Senna's forces assembling, not to defend the walls, but to ride out through the gates. A sortie, designed to break Garrett's siege before it could truly form. The battle that would determine the kingdom's future was beginning, and Kael was trapped in a chamber with a wounded king, no medical supplies, and enemies who'd proven they could reach anyone, anywhere, at any time. The knife that had nearly killed Aldrich lay on the floor nearby, blood still wet on the blade. Cale picked it up, testing its weight. If they came again, he wouldn't be helpless. He'd fight, even if he had no idea how. The knife felt wrong in Cale's hand. Too heavy, too foreign, designed for killing in ways his mind understood theoretically, but his body had never practiced. He set it down on the table beside Aldrich's bed and tried to think past the fear clawing at his throat. Outside, the sounds of battle grew louder. Steel on steel shouted orders, the thunder of hooves as Senna's cavalry poured through the gates. Cale moved to the window, watching the organized chaos below. "Tell me what you see," Aldrich said from the bed. His voice was strained but steady. "Senna's splitting her force. Main cavalry heading straight for Garrett's position in the hills. Secondary units sweeping the flanks, cutting off retreat routes. Cale's strategic mind engaged despite the circumstances. She's not trying to break the siege. She's trying to capture Garrett himself. Smart. Aldrich shifted, wincing. If she brings him back alive, we can extract every name, every conspirator, everyone who helped plan this. And if she fails, then we're trapped in a fortress with internal enemies and an army at our gates." Aldrich's smile was grim. "Standard Tuesday for a king, really?" A knock at the door made Cale grab the knife again, but it was just Lyra, carrying what looked like salvaged medical supplies. "Corvain sent these," she said, setting down a basket. "Most of his office burned, but he saved the essentials. He said you'd know what to do with them." Cale sorted through the supplies quickly. Bandages, basic antiseptics, needle and thread for proper suturing, a few vials of pain medication. Not much, but better than nothing. "How's the physician himself?" Aldrich asked. "Alive? Angry? Currently organizing bucket brigades to save what's left of his research." Lyra's expression was troubled. "Your Majesty, the attack on his office wasn't random. Someone knew exactly which compounds to destroy, which records to burn. They were targeting your treatment specifically." "Of course they were." Aldrich tried to sit up, failed, settled for propping himself on one elbow. "If they can't kill me directly, they'll destroy the cure and let nature finish what their assassins started." Cale checked Aldrich's bandages, relieved to see no fresh bleeding. The stitches were holding, crude as they were. But the king needed rest, needed time to heal, and time was the one thing they didn't have. "The compound," Cale said suddenly. "We need to make more. If they destroyed Corvain's supply, I have the formula memorized," Aldrich interrupted. "Had to, after 5 years of depending on various versions of it. The ingredients are in the royal vault, protected behind locks and guards that not even the council can breach. Can we access it now?" "Lyra can." Aldrich looked at the guard. "Tell the vault keeper I'm authorizing emergency access. Bring everything on this list." He recited a series of chemical names and measurements that Cale scrambled to write down. "And bring Corvain if he can be spared. We'll need his expertise to actually mix it." After Lyra left, silence settled over the room. Cale rebandaged Aldrich's wound with proper materials this time, his hands steadier now that he had something concrete to focus on. "You're getting better at this," Aldrich observed. "I've had a lot of practice in the last week." "More than that. You're adapting. Most people freeze when violence starts. You just adjust your calculations and keep moving." Cale tied off the bandage carefully. "I spent my whole life being the weakest wolf in the pack. You learn to survive through other means. By being smarter than everyone else. By being more desperate." Cale met Aldrich's gaze. "They're the same thing, sometimes." A massive explosion shook the fortress. Cale rushed to the window and saw fire blooming on the eastern wall. Not from Garrett's forces, from inside the fortress itself. "Sabotage," he said. "They're destroying our own defenses." Aldrich swore viciously. "How many traitors are in my own walls?" The answer came faster than either of them wanted. Over the next hour, reports flooded in from various parts of the fortress. Guard towers set ablaze, armories locked from the inside, trapping soldiers away from their weapons, food stores poisoned, water supplies contaminated. The council's coup wasn't just about Garrett's army outside. It was about collapsing the fortress from within, making it impossible for Aldrich to hold power, even if he survived. Corvain arrived with Lyra, both of them soot-stained and exhausted. The physician carried a leather satchel filled with ingredients from the vault. Half the fortress is turning on itself, Corvain reported grimly. Guards fighting guards, servants choosing sides, complete chaos. Senna's sortie pulled most of the loyal soldiers outside the walls, which left openings for the conspirators inside. How many of the council are involved? Aldrich demanded. All of them, as far as I can tell. Even the ones who seemed neutral. Corvain began setting up makeshift workspace or organizing ingredients with shaking hands. They've been planning this for months. The assassination attempts, the sabotage, Garrett's siege. It's all coordinated. Then we coordinate back. Aldrich pushed himself into a sitting position despite Cale's protests. Cale, you know strategy. If you were trying to hold a fortress against external siege and internal betrayal simultaneously, what would you do? Kael's mind shifted gears, viewing the problem like any other tactical scenario. Consolidate. Pull back to the most defensible position with the most loyal troops. Sacrifice the outer defenses if necessary. Focus everything on holding the inner keep. Which is exactly what they'd expect me to do. Aldrich's eyes gleamed. So we do the opposite. We push out. Make them think I'm too weak to hold anything, that I'm abandoning the fortress entirely. That's suicide, Corvain said flatly. It's misdirection. Aldrich looked at Kael. You said Senna's trying to capture Garrett. If she succeeds, if she brings him back and we can prove the council's involvement, we win. The common soldiers, the merchants, the people, they'll turn against the traitors once they see evidence. And if Senna fails to capture him, then we've already lost anyway, and at least we'll go down fighting instead of hiding. Cale understood what Aldrich wasn't saying. The king needed to be seen, needed to prove he was still in control despite the knife wound and the chaos. Hiding in his chambers would confirm every rumor that the cure had failed, that he was dying after all. You can barely stand, Cale pointed out. Then you'll help me stand. Aldrich extended his hand. Come on, royal physician, time to earn that title. They made a strange procession through the fortress corridors. Aldrich leaning heavily on Kael, Corvain following with medical supplies, Lyra and 2 other guards forming a protective square around them. Every step clearly pained the king, but he kept his face impassive, his posture as straight as injury allowed. Servants and soldiers stared as they passed, some with hope, others with barely concealed hostility. Cale could feel the tension crackling in the air, the fortress teetering on the edge of complete collapse. They made it to the main hall, where a cluster of Aldrich's remaining loyal officers had gathered. The men looked exhausted, bloodied, desperate. Your Majesty, one of them said, relief flooding his face. We thought, I know what you thought. I'm still here. Aldrich's voice carried authority, despite the pain lacing through it. Report. The news was bad. Senna's sortie had engaged Garrett's main force, but the fighting was fierce and casualties were mounting. Inside the fortress, at least a third of the guard had revealed themselves as conspirators, and they'd seized control of the eastern quarter. The walls were still holding, but barely. What about the council? Aldrich asked. Barricaded in the council chambers. They've declared you unfit to rule due to illness and named Lord Varen as interim regent. Aldrich's laugh was harsh. Of course they did. And I assume Varen accepted this burden reluctantly? He's already issuing orders in your name. Not for long. Aldrich straightened, ignoring the way the movement made blood seep through his bandages. Take me to the council chambers. Your Majesty, that's... the officer began. Not a request. They moved through corridors that grew progressively more dangerous. Twice they encountered groups of hostile guards who backed off when they saw Aldrich still standing, still armed, still very much alive. The third time, the guards didn't back off. That's far enough, one of them said, leveling a crossbow. The council's orders are clear. No one disturbs their session. I'm the king, Aldrich said coldly. Their session exists at my pleasure. You're a sick man clinging to power. The council has voted. You're relieved of duty. Cale felt Aldrich tense beside him, preparing to fight despite the wound that could tear open with any sudden movement. But before violence could erupt, a new voice cut through the standoff. Lower your weapons! Now! Petra emerged from a side corridor, flanked by a dozen soldiers wearing black and silver. The older woman looked like she'd been through hell, armor dented, face bruised, blood on her sword, but her eyes were clear and hard. Commander Petra, Aldrich said, I thought you were with Senna's sortie. I was. until I realized what was happening inside the fortress. She moved to stand beside Aldrich, her soldiers taking defensive positions. The council's coup needed to be stopped before Senna could bring back Garrett. I rode back with a fast unit. The hostile guards looked at each other uncertainly. They'd expected easy prey, not armed resistance. "Last chance," Petra said. "Lower your weapons and stand aside, or I start treating you as enemy combatants." They lowered their weapons. The council chambers were locked from the inside, heavy doors barred. Petra's soldiers set charges while Kyle helped Aldrich stay upright, the king's face going grayer with each passing moment. "You need to lie down," Kyle said quietly. "After." Aldrich's jaw was set. "After I've reminded them who's in charge." The charges blew the doors inward with a concussive blast that shook the entire corridor. Petra's soldiers poured through, weapons ready, and found the council members scrambling for side exits that Petra had already blocked. Lord Varen stood at the head of the council table, trying to maintain dignity even as his escape routes vanished. "This is an outrage! You're interrupting a legal session of—" "There's nothing legal about declaring the king unfit while actively trying to murder him," Aldrich said, limping into the chamber. The council members stared, their faces cycling through shock, fear, and calculation. "Hello, Varen. I understand you've promoted yourself to regent. How generous of you to manage my kingdom while I'm still breathing." "Your Majesty, we only acted out of concern for the realm's stability," Lady Thessia began. "You acted out of greed." Aldrich moved to the table, leaning on it for support, but making the gesture look intentional. "Every one of you has been profiting from my illness. Territory agreements, trade deals, promises of power once I was dead. And when I recovered, when Kyle actually succeeded in curing me, you couldn't let that stand." "This is absurd," Varen said. "We're loyal servants of the crown. You set fire to Corvain's office, poisoned my medicine, sent assassins to my chambers." Aldrich's voice dropped to something dangerous. "You coordinated with Garrett to lay siege while your people sabotaged from within. That's not service, that's treason." "You have no proof," Thessia said, but her voice wavered. "Don't I?" Aldrich looked at Petra. "Show them." Petra stepped forward, pulling a folded document from her armor. This was found on one of Garrett's messengers. Instructions for the internal sabotage, signed by every member of this council. She spread the document on the table. Cale could see the signatures from where he stood, all of them, exactly as damning as Aldrich claimed. The council members went silent. Several looked at the exits, calculating odds. Others seemed to deflate, accepting defeat. "You can't arrest all of us," Varen said finally. "You don't have the authority, don't have the guards, I have the proof. I have the king. And I have loyal soldiers who are very, very tired of traitors." Petra's smile was cold. "So yes, Lord Varen, I can arrest all of you. The only question is whether you make this easy or difficult." The fight went out of them all at once. These were politicians, not warriors. They'd planned coups and conspiracies from the safety of chambers and secret meetings, but confronted with actual consequences, they folded. Petra's soldiers began taking them into custody. Varen was still protesting, claiming legal protections and demanding trials. Thessia went quietly, her face blank. The others ranged between defiant and terrified. As the last council member was led away, Aldrich finally allowed himself to sag. Kyle caught him before he could fall, lowering him into one of the council chairs. "That was incredibly stupid," Kyle said, checking the king's bandages. Fresh blood had soaked through. "You've torn half your stitches." "Worth it." Aldrich's breathing was labored. "They needed to see I wasn't dying. Needed to know the cure worked." "The cure won't work if you bleed out from sheer stubbornness." Corvain appeared with his medical bag, already preparing fresh bandages. "Get his armor off. We need to restitch this immediately." They worked in the council chamber itself, turning it into an impromptu operating theater. Petra posted guards at the doors while Kyle and Corvain reopened Aldrich's wound to properly close the torn sections. The king bore it without complaint, his eyes focused on the ceiling. "What about Senna?" he asked. "Any word from the sortie?" "Last report had her forces pushing Garrett back toward the river," Petra said. "She's trying to trap him against the water, force surrender or capture. And if he escapes, then we hunt him down. But the council's arrest changes everything. Without internal support, Garrett's siege is just an army camping in hostile territory. Petra moved to the window. The question is what happens when word spreads that you've taken the council into custody. Some soldiers will celebrate. Others will see it as tyranny. Let them see it however they want, Aldrich said through gritted teeth as Corvain pulled another stitch tight. The evidence speaks for itself. But Petra was right to be concerned. Over the next hours, as word spread through the fortress, reactions split exactly as she'd predicted. Soldiers loyal to Aldrich breathed easier, feeling like maybe the nightmare was ending. But others, those who'd thrown in with the council, who'd been promised positions and power after the coup succeeded, began to panic. And panicked soldiers did desperate things. The first attempted breakout came from the eastern quarter, where conspirators tried to fight their way to the gates and flee to Garrett's army. Petra's forces met them in the corridors, and the fighting was vicious and close quarters. 20 dead on both sides before the attempt was crushed. The second attempt was more subtle. A fire started in the dungeons, designed to look accidental, but clearly meant to kill the imprisoned council members before they could provide testimony. Alert guards caught it early, but the message was clear. There were still enemies in the fortress willing to kill to cover their tracks. Cale stayed with Aldrich through all of it, monitoring his condition obsessively. The king's temperature remained stable despite the stress and injury, which meant the compound was still working, but the blood loss and physical trauma were taking their toll. Aldrich drifted in and out of consciousness, his body demanding rest, his mind refused to allow. "You need to sleep," Kael said during one of his waking periods. "Can't. Not until Senna returns." Aldrich's eyes were fever-bright but focused. "Not until I know we've actually won. You've arrested the council, proven the cure works, maintained control of the fortress despite assassination and sabotage." Kael changed the king's bandages with practiced efficiency now. "What more do you need to consider it a victory? Garrett's head on a spike would be nice." But Aldrich's smile was weak. "You're right, though. We've turned it around. The question is whether we can hold it." The answer came at dawn. Kael was dozing in a chair beside Aldrich's bed when trumpets sounded from the walls. He jerked awake, grabbing his knife automatically, before recognizing the pattern. Not an alarm, a victory signal. He rushed to the window and saw Senna's cavalry riding through the gates. They looked battered, exhausted, covered in blood and mud. But in the center of the formation, bound and on horseback, was Lord Garrett. Aldrich was awake instantly, despite his injuries. "Is that—" Senna caught him. Kael couldn't keep the relief out of his voice. She actually caught him. They made their way down to the courtyard, Aldrich moving slowly but under his own power. The fortress population gathered to watch as Senna's forces entered, dragging their prize. Garrett looked worse than the soldiers who'd captured him. His armor was dented, his face bruised and bloodied, and he had the hollow-eyed look of someone who'd seen his entire plan collapse. When he saw Aldrich standing there, very much alive and clearly in command, something broke in his expression. "Your Majesty," Senna said, dismounting stiffly. "Lord Garrett and 43 of his top commanders. The rest of his forces scattered when they saw him captured. Most fled south. Some surrendered." "Casualties?" 87 dead, twice that wounded. But we held." Senna looked at Garrett with undisguised contempt. "And we have our traitor." Garrett was forced to his knees before Aldrich. The watching crowd pressed closer, hungry for this moment. "You're supposed to be dying," Garrett said, the words coming out bitter and confused. "The physician said—" "The physician was wrong, or you were lied to." Aldrich's voice carried across the courtyard. "I am healed, Garrett, and your coup has failed. The council voted. The council is in chains awaiting trial for treason, as are you." Aldrich looked at the gathered crowd. "Let this be understood by everyone. The sickness that weakened me is cured. The traitors who tried to exploit that weakness are captured. And the kingdom continues under my rule." The crowd erupted. Not quite cheering, and too many people had lost friends and family in the fighting for celebration. But there was relief, maybe hope, definitely the sense that something terrible had been prevented. Garrett was dragged away to join his co-conspirators in the dungeons. Senna's soldiers dispersed to rest and tend their wounds, and slowly, gradually, the fortress began to settle. Kael found himself back in Aldrich's chambers, going through the routine of checking bandages and administering the compound. The king was fading fast now that the immediate crisis had passed, his body finally demanding payment for the last 24 hours of relentless activity. "We need to discuss what happens next," Aldrich murmured as Kael worked. "The trials, the executions, rebuilding the council with people who aren't traitors. Later. Right now you sleep. You're getting bossy, royal physician. You're getting stubborn, your majesty." Kael finished the bandaging. "Sleep. I'll wake you if anything urgent happens." Aldrich's eyes drifted closed. "Kael?" "Yes?" "Thank you. For everything. For refusing to let me die, for standing beside me during all of this, for—" "Sleep," Kael said gently. "Thank me later." He sat in the chair beside the bed, watching Aldrich's breathing even out into genuine rest. Outside, the fortress continued its recovery. Fires were being extinguished, wounded were being tended, damage was being assessed. They'd survived. Against assassins and sabotage and siege and an entire council of traitors, they'd actually survived. Kael should have felt triumphant. Instead, he just felt exhausted. A knock at the door. Petra entered quietly, respecting the king's sleep. "How is he?" she asked. "Alive? Recovering? Stubborn as hell." Kael rubbed his eyes. "How's the fortress?" "Messy, but improving. We've identified most of the conspirators. Some are in custody, some dead, some fled before we could grab them." Petra settled into another chair with a grunt. "The trials will take weeks, maybe months. Everyone wants justice, wants answers, wants someone to blame." "They'll blame me," Kael said quietly, "for being the catalyst, for saving him when I was supposed to be a temporary comfort." "Some will. Others will see you as a hero." Petra's expression was unreadable. "Either way, you're famous now. The frontier wolf who cured the dying king and helped break a coup. That kind of story spreads." Kael thought about Mira's letter, about Garen's fury at his unexpected survival. "That's what worries me." Speaking of which, Petra pulled out another sealed letter. "This arrived during the fighting. From your pack territory." Kael's stomach dropped. He took the letter, recognizing his father's handwriting this time. The seal was broken, which meant someone had read it before deciding to deliver it. He opened it with shaking hands. The message was brief. "Kael, Garen knows you're alive and serving the king. He's calling it betrayal and using it to consolidate power. Your name has been stripped from pack records. Your father is no longer under protection. I'm writing this from a friend's house because our cabin was burned 3 days ago. We're alive, but we need to leave pack territory. Can you help?" Marcus Kael read it 3 times, feeling rage build in his chest with each pass. "Bad news?" Petra asked. "My father. Garen's punishing him for my success." Kael stood abruptly, pacing. "I need to get him out. Bring him here, somewhere safe." "I'll authorize an extraction team," Petra said immediately. "Give me a location and we'll send riders within the hour." "Just like that?" "Just like that. You saved the king's life, which means you've earned significant favor." Petra stood as well. "Besides, Aldrich will want your father protected. He's practical about these things. Keeping you loyal means protecting what you care about." Kael gave her the location details he'd memorized from Mira's previous letter, where she'd said she was watching over Marcus. Petra left to organize the extraction, leaving Kael alone with his thoughts and the sleeping king. This was what success looked like, apparently. A kingdom saved, a coup broken, traitors in chains. But also his father displaced and hunted, his former pack turned enemy, his name stripped from the records of everyone he'd grown up with. He'd gained everything and lost everything simultaneously. "Worth it?" Aldrich's voice was rough from sleep. Kael turned. The king was awake, watching him with those sharp eyes. "I don't know yet," Kael admitted. "Ask me in a year." "Fair enough." Aldrich shifted carefully, testing his wound. "Your father. We'll get him to safety, and anyone else from your pack who helped you. There's only Mira. She's the one who gave me the research that saved your life. Then she comes too. We'll find positions for them both, keep them protected." Aldrich's smile was tired but genuine. "Your pack now, Kael. My pack. And I protect what's mine." Over the following days, the fortress transformed. The damage from sabotage was repaired. The conspirators were sorted into categories: leaders who would face execution, followers who might earn mercy through testimony, opportunists who'd simply backed the wrong side. The trials began in the Great Hall, with Aldrich presiding despite Corvain's protests about rest and recovery. The evidence was damning: the signed document authorizing sabotage, testimony from captured messengers, financial records showing bribes and payoffs. One by one, the council members were convicted. Varen first, his protests about legal precedent falling on deaf ears. Then Thessia, who maintained icy dignity even as her sentence was pronounced. The others followed in succession, their fates sealed by their own conspiracy. Garrett's trial was the most dramatic. He tried to claim he had been acting to save the kingdom from a fraud, that Kael's cure was temporary and dangerous, that Aldrich was unfit to rule. Then Corvain took the stand. The physician presented his cellular analysis, his documentation of the treatment, his evidence that the cure was not only real but sustainable. He explained the autoimmune condition in terms even non-medical people could understand. He described watching the king's recovery firsthand, tracking every improvement, documenting every success. The treatment works, Corvain concluded. His Majesty is cured, and anyone claiming otherwise is either ignorant or lying. Garrett had no response to that. His execution was scheduled for the following week. Kael watched it all from Aldrich's side, playing his role as royal physician. He provided medical testimony when needed, adjusted the king's treatment as his wound healed, and tried to ignore the stares from everyone in the hall. Some looks were grateful, others resentful. A few were calculating, already trying to determine how to use the king's new favorite for their own advantage. Politics, Kael was learning, never actually stopped. It just changed shape. On the 5th day after Garrett's capture, riders returned from frontier territory. They brought Marcus Thorne and Mira, both looking exhausted but unharmed. Kael met them in the courtyard, and his father's embrace nearly knocked him over. "You're alive," Marcus said, his voice breaking. "When Garen said you'd been sent to a dying king, I thought, I know, but I survived. We both did." Kael pulled back, looking his father over. Marcus looked older, worn down by stress and displacement, but whole. "You're safe now, both of you." Mira's hug was briefer, but no less fierce. "You actually did it," she said. "Saved a king, broke a coup, became a legend." "I became a target. That too." She grinned, and it was so familiar, so much like home, that Kael felt something in his chest ease. "But at least you're an important target now." Aldrich met them that evening, moving with increasing ease as his wound continued to heal. He thanked Marcus for raising someone foolish enough to try the impossible, and thanked Mira for providing the research that made it possible. "You're both welcome at Blackridge Hold for as long as you wish," Aldrich said. "Positions will be found, quarters assigned, protection guaranteed. Your family to the royal physician, which makes you family to the crown." Later, as servants showed Marcus and Mira to their new rooms, Kael found himself alone with Aldrich in the king's private study. "How does it feel?" Aldrich asked. "Having them here, safe, after everything?" "Like something I didn't know was broken just got fixed," Kael admitted. "But also like I've dragged them into something dangerous." "You have this life, this court, this kingdom. It's all dangerous." Aldrich poured 2 glasses of wine, handing one to Kael. "But it's also opportunity. Your father can live out his years in comfort instead of barely surviving in pack territory. Your friend can use her skills without fear. And you—" He raised his glass. "You've proven that frontier wolves can be just as deadly as any courtier, just in different ways." They drank to that. "What happens now?" Kael asked. "With Garen, with the pact treaties, with everything. Now we renegotiate. From a position of strength." Aldrich's smile was sharp. "Your former alpha sent you here thinking I was dying, thinking he'd secure favorable terms through my desperation. Instead, I'm healed, and his gift turned out to be the person who saved me. That changes the calculation considerably. He'll be angry. Let him be angry. He's a frontier alpha with maybe 500 wolves. I'm a king with a standing army of 10,000 soldiers." Aldrich's eyes glittered. "If he wants to make this a conflict, I'll remind him why kingdoms conquer packs, not the other way around." Kael thought about Garen's smug face, his calculated cruelty, the way he'd traded people like property. The idea of seeing him brought low had a certain appeal. When you renegotiate, Kale said carefully, I want to be there. Planning to gloat? Planning to make sure he understands exactly what he threw away. Aldrich's laugh was genuine this time, free of pain. Now you're thinking like a king. The following week brought news from across the kingdom. Word of the coup's failure had spread, and reactions were mixed. Some territories expressed relief that Aldrich remained in power. Others were clearly disappointed their plans for independence had been thwarted. But everyone acknowledged the same truth. The dying king was dead. Long lived the king who refused to die. Kyle's reputation spread with the news. The frontier wolf who'd cured the incurable. The strategist turned physician. The outsider who'd saved a kingdom from itself. Letters began arriving from other rulers, other territories, requesting consultations for mysterious illnesses, offering positions, promising wealth and status if Kyle would bring his expertise to their courts. He burned them all. Not interested in spreading your miracle cure? Aldrich asked, watching another letter turn to ash. Not interested in becoming a commodity again. Kyle stirred the fire with a poker. I've been traded once. That was enough. What if I ordered you to consider them? You won't. You're very certain of that. You're not the type to waste resources. Kale met Aldrich's gaze. And right now, I'm most useful here, keeping you alive and watching your back. True. Aldrich settled into his chair, his wound finally healed enough to sit comfortably. Though eventually you'll need to decide what you actually want to do with this life you've built. Right now, I just want to survive the next crisis. Always thinking ahead. That's what I like about you, Kale. You plan for disaster even while celebrating victory. Someone has to. But despite the cynicism, despite the caution, Kyle couldn't deny the truth. They'd won. Not perfectly, not without cost, but definitively. The coup was broken, the traitors imprisoned, the kingdom stabilized. And Kyle himself had transformed from a sacrificial offering into someone with actual power, someone who mattered. The morning of Garrett's execution, the entire fortress gathered to witness justice. The former lord was brought to the courtyard in chains, defiant to the end. You'll regret this, he spat at Aldrich. The other territories won't tolerate tyranny. They'll rise against you. And next time, there won't be a next time, Aldrich said calmly, because everyone will remember what happens to traitors who underestimate me. The axe fell. Kyle watched without flinching. He'd seen enough death in the past weeks to be numb to one more, especially one so richly earned. Around him, the crowd reacted with grim satisfaction. Not celebration exactly, but closure. As the body was carried away and the crowd dispersed, Aldrich turned to Kyle. One threat eliminated, dozens more waiting to emerge. The king's expression was tired but determined. Welcome to kingship, Physician Thorne. It never actually ends. Sounds exhausting. It is. But also, Aldrich paused, searching for words. Also strangely satisfying. Building something, protecting it, watching it survive against all odds. Kale thought about that. About the fortress standing strong. About his father and Mira safe within its walls. About a cure that had seemed impossible becoming reality. Yeah, he said quietly. I can see that. That afternoon, a rider arrived from Pack territory. Not an official envoy, but a young wolf Kyle vaguely recognized from hunting parties years ago. He carried a message sealed with Garen's mark. Aldrich opened it in Kyle's presence, reading quickly. Then he handed it over. The message was concise. To King Aldrich of Blackridge Hold, I acknowledge that Kyle Thorne is no longer bound by pack law, having been released from our territory under the terms of our agreement. I request formal renegotiation of our treaty, as circumstances have changed since the original terms were drafted. I await your response. Alpha Garon. He's scared, Kyle said, rereading the formal language that barely concealed desperation. The other packs must have heard what happened, and now he's worried you'll retaliate. Should I? Aldrich asked. Kale considered. Part of him wanted vengeance, wanted to watch Garen face consequences for his casual cruelty. But another part, the strategic part, saw opportunity. No, he said finally. Renegotiate the treaty. Get better terms, secure trade routes, establish favorable borders, use his fear to build something lasting instead of just punishing him. That's remarkably mature of you. I didn't say I wouldn't enjoy watching him squirm during negotiations. Aldrich's laugh was full and genuine. Now there's the wolf I know. Fine, we'll renegotiate. And you'll attend every session, sitting at my right hand, reminding Garen exactly who he discarded. The treaty negotiations were scheduled for 3 weeks out, giving Aldrich time to fully recover and Kyle time to prepare. In the meantime, life at Blackridge Hold settled into new patterns. Marcus took a position managing the fortress's supply records, his organizational skills and decades of pack experience proving valuable. Mira joined Corvain in the medical wing, her research abilities complementing his expertise perfectly. And Kale. Kale learned to be royal physician in truth, not just title. Corvain taught him anatomy, pharmacology, diagnostic techniques. Senna taught him to recognize poison and defend against assassination. Petra taught him court politics and how to read people's intentions beneath their words. He was building a new life from the wreckage of his old one. Not the life he'd expected, not the life he'd chosen, but undeniably his own. 3 weeks later, Alpha Garon arrived at Blackridge Hold. He came with a small escort, 5 wolves, all looking nervous and out of place in the fortress's martial atmosphere. Garon himself had aged in the months since Kyle had seen him, new lines around his eyes, gray threading deeper through his hair. The negotiations took place in the Great Hall with full ceremony. Aldrich sat on his throne, fully armored, radiating the power of a king who'd survived assassination and coup. His court surrounded him, loyal nobles, military commanders, advisors, and at his right hand, wearing the formal robes of royal physician, sat Kael Thorne. Garon's eyes found Kael immediately, and something complicated crossed his face. Surprise, maybe. Anger, definitely, but also something that might have been regret. Alpha Garon, Aldrich said formally, welcome to Blackridge Hold. I understand you wish to renegotiate our treaty. Your Majesty, yes. Garen's voice was carefully neutral. The original terms were drafted under different circumstances. I believe both our territories would benefit from revised agreements. Different circumstances. Aldrich's smile was sharp. You mean when you thought I was dying and sent me Kael as a final comfort? The hall went very quiet. I sent him as part of our agreement, Garen said carefully. You sent him to die. Let's not pretend otherwise. Aldrich leaned forward. But he didn't die. Instead, he cured me, saved my life where every physician in 6 kingdoms had failed. And now you want to renegotiate because you've realized you traded away the most valuable person in your pack. Garen's jaw tightened. His eyes flicked to Kael again, searching for something. Vindication, maybe. Or condemnation. Kael met his gaze steadily and said nothing. Royal Physician Thorne has indeed proven valuable, Garen said finally. I may have underestimated his potential. You traded him like livestock, Kael said quietly. Everyone in the hall turned to stare. You used my father as leverage to force my compliance. And when you thought I died serving your political interests, you burned my father's home and stripped my name from pack records. Kael, don't. Kael stood, and the movement felt powerful, final. You made your choice, Alpha. You decided I was disposable. You don't get to regret that now just because it turned out to be the wrong calculation. Silence stretched across the hall. Then Garen did something Kyle never expected. He bowed. Not a formal nod, but a full, deep bow of genuine respect. You're right, Garen said. I made a mistake. I saw your weakness and not your strength. I valued the immediate advantage over long-term potential. And I'm sorry. Kyle hadn't prepared for an apology, for rage, for excuses, for political maneuvering, but not for genuine contrition. That doesn't fix anything, he said. I know. But I wanted you to hear it anyway. Garen straightened. Your Majesty, I'm here to renegotiate our treaty. I acknowledge that I have no leverage, no advantage, no grounds to demand favorable terms. I'm asking for what you're willing to offer, and I'll accept whatever judgment you consider fair. Aldrich looked at Kael. The question was silent but clear. Your call. Kael thought about everything Garen had put him through, the fear, the humiliation, the calculated cruelty. He thought about his father's burned cabin, about being traded away, about walking into Blackridge Hold expecting to die. Then he thought about what he'd built from that disaster. A cure, a position, a purpose, a home. Renegotiate in good faith, Kael said finally. Fair terms for both sides. No exploitation, no tricks, just honest agreements that serve both territories. You're being generous, Garen said quietly. I'm being strategic. A stable frontier serves the kingdom's interests, and proving that the king's mercy is real serves mine. Kael met his former alpha's eyes. But understand this, Setbom, I'm not your property anymore. I'm not your pack's tool. I'm royal physician to King Aldrich, and that means my loyalty lies here now. I understand. Garen bowed again, this time to Kael directly. And for what it's worth, I'm glad you survived. I'm glad you proved me wrong. The negotiations continued through the afternoon, and by evening, a new treaty had been drafted. Better terms for the kingdom, reasonable protections for the pack, trade agreements that benefited both sides. Not perfect, but fair. As Garen prepared to leave, he stopped beside Kael one final time. Your father, he said quietly. Tell him I'm sorry for what happened to his home. The pack will rebuild it if he ever wants to return. He won't. Kael's voice was certain. He's home now. We both are. Garen nodded, accepting that, and left. That evening, Kael stood on the fortress walls, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and red. Behind him, the fortress hummed with life. Soldiers training, merchants trading, servants preparing the evening meal. His father was somewhere in the supply buildings, reorganizing inventory with Marcus's particular brand of obsessive precision. Mira was likely in the medical wing, arguing with Corvain about some theoretical treatment approach, and Aldrich was in his study, fully recovered, reviewing reports and planning the kingdom's future. Quite the view, a voice said behind him. Kael turned to find Senna approaching, her usual armor replaced with simple traveling clothes. You're leaving? He asked. Routine patrol. Northern territories need to be reminded the king's authority extends beyond Blackridge's walls. She joined him at the wall, looking out over the landscape. You did well today, with Garen. I didn't do anything. Exactly. You could have gloated, could have demanded revenge, could have made him suffer. Instead, you chose the path that actually solves problems. Senna's smile was approving. You're learning. Learning what? How to be powerful without being cruel. It's a rare skill. After she left, Kael remained at the wall until full dark. The fortress lights began to glow, warm against the night. In the distance, he could see the campfires of merchant caravans, traders making their way along roads the treaty had secured. He'd come here expecting to die. Instead, he'd saved a king, broken a coup, and built something that might actually last. Not bad for a frontier wolf who'd never won a fight in his life. The door to the wall tower opened and Aldrich emerged, moving easily now that his wound had fully healed. Brooding? The king asked. Reflecting. Is there a difference? Brooding is when you regret the past. Reflecting is when you learn from it. Aldrich joined him at the wall. And what have you learned, royal physician? Kael considered the question seriously. That being disposable and being underestimated are different things. One is about how others see you. The other is about how you see yourself. Philosophy now? You're really settling into court life. Someone has to balance out your tendency toward direct violence. Aldrich's laugh echoed across the courtyard. Below them, guards looked up and smiled, seeing their king healthy and whole. You know what the best part of surviving is? Aldrich said. Getting to decide what comes next. We're not reacting anymore, Kael. We're building. And that's a lot more interesting than just trying not to die. Kael thought about the future spreading before them. Treaties to negotiate, territories to manage, threats to counter. The work of maintaining power instead of just seizing it. So what comes next? He asked. For me? Rebuilding a council that isn't treasonous, securing the kingdom's borders, making sure everyone remembers why they fell in line. Aldrich looked at him. For you? Whatever you want. You've earned that right. What did Kael want? A year ago, he would have said safety, acceptance, a place in his pack where his worth was recognized. Now, I want to keep doing this, he said. Solving problems people think are impossible, turning disasters into opportunities, making people who underestimated me regret it. Good. Aldrich's smile was sharp with satisfaction. Because I've got plenty of impossible problems that need solving, and you, Kael Thorne, are exactly the kind of disaster I need on my side. They stood together on the walls as night settled over Blackridge Hold, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, Kael felt like he was exactly where he belonged. Kael was in the medical wing, teaching Mira how to prepare the temperature-regulating compound, when a messenger burst through the door without knocking. "Royal Physician, the king requires your immediate presence in the war room." Kael exchanged a glance with Mira. "What's happened?" "Envoy from the eastern provinces, they're requesting your expertise for their duke's illness." The messenger shifted uncomfortably. "And they're not asking politely." The war room was crowded when Kael arrived. Aldrich sat at the head of the table, his expression carefully neutral. Across from him stood a man in elaborate robes, clearly high-ranking, clearly used to getting his way. "Ah, the miracle worker," the envoy said, turning as Kael entered. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Duke Theron has heard of your success with His Majesty and requests your immediate attendance at our court." "Requests," Aldrich said mildly. "Or demands?" "The Duke's condition is deteriorating rapidly. Every day matters." The envoy's tone suggested this was obviously more important than whatever Kael might be doing. "We're prepared to offer significant compensation. Gold, territory agreements, favorable trade terms. Royal Physician Thorne is not for sale," Aldrich interrupted. "He serves this crown, not the highest bidder." "Your Majesty, surely you understand the political value of helping the eastern provinces. The Duke is a powerful ally, who's apparently dying." Kael spoke for the first time, drawing the envoy's attention. "What are his symptoms?" The envoy blinked, clearly not expecting to be questioned. "Weakness, pain, progressive decline, similar to what His Majesty experienced." "Similar how?" "Specific symptoms, not general descriptions." "I'm not a physician." "Then you're wasting everyone's time." Kael moved to stand beside Aldrich. "If Duke Theron wants my expertise, he can send detailed medical records, physician's notes, and a formal request through proper diplomatic channels. I'm not going to travel across the kingdom based on vague similarities." The envoy's face flushed. "This is highly irregular." "The Duke can follow the same protocols as everyone else." Aldrich's voice carried finality. "My royal physician is not a traveling performer. If your Duke requires help, provide information, and we'll determine if Kael's expertise is relevant." After the envoy left, sputtering about insults and diplomatic incidents, Aldrich turned to Kael with a tired smile. "That's the third request this week. Everyone with a mysterious illness suddenly thinks you're the answer. Are they all like that? Demanding? Entitled? No actual medical information?" "Most of them. A few are legitimate. Genuinely sick people with conditions that might actually benefit from your approach." Aldrich pulled out a stack of letters. "I've been filtering the obvious nonsense, but you should review these." Kael spent the next hours reading through requests. Some were clearly opportunistic, minor nobles hoping to curry favor by claiming serious illness. Others were desperate parents seeking help for sick children. A few were genuinely mysterious conditions that made his analytical mind itch to investigate. "This one," he said, pulling out a letter from a merchant family in the Southern Territories. "Their daughter has symptoms that sound autoimmune. Joint pain, unexplained fever cycles, wounds that won't heal. That's a 6-day journey each direction." "I know, but if I'm right about the condition, she's dying the same way the king was dying, and she's 14 years old." Aldrich studied him. "You want to help her?" "I want to know if the treatment works for others, if it's replicable, not just a lucky solution for one specific case." "And if it fails? If you can't cure her?" "Then I learn from it. Figure out what's different, what I'm missing." Kael set down the letter. "But I have to try, because you couldn't save everyone in your pack, and now you're compensating." The observation was uncomfortably accurate. Kael had spent years being unable to help, unable to protect, too weak to matter. Now that he had the knowledge and position to actually make a difference. "Is that a problem?" he asked. "No." Just don't let guilt drive your decisions more than logic does. Aldrich stood, stretching carefully. His wound had healed completely, but the memory of it still influenced his movements. If you want to take this case, I'll approve it, but you're taking guards, taking supplies, and checking in regularly. The last thing I need is my royal physician getting killed by bandits or kidnapped by opportunistic nobles. You're protective. You're valuable. There's a difference. The journey south took 7 days, not 6. Roads were worse than expected, and they had to detour around a flooded river. Kale traveled with Senna's hand-picked guards, including Lyra, who'd proven herself capable during the coup, and enough medical supplies to equip a small hospital. Mira came too, insisting she could help with diagnosis and treatment. Marcus stayed at Blackridge, managing the supply lines that kept them all fed and equipped. The merchant family lived in a prosperous town built around river trade. Their home was large but not ostentatious, and they greeted Kyle with desperate gratitude rather than entitlement. "Thank you for coming," the mother said, her eyes red from crying. "The local physicians say there's nothing they can do, that we should just make her comfortable." Their daughter, Elena, lay in a bright room overlooking the river. She looked too small in the large bed, her face pale and drawn with pain, but her eyes were sharp when Kyle entered. "You're the wolf who saved the king," she said. Not a question. "I am. And you're the girl who's not going to die from something we can fix." Confident. Hopeful. There's a difference. He spent 2 days studying Elena's condition. The symptoms matched Aldrich's almost perfectly. The cycling pain, the fever spikes, the wounds that wouldn't heal properly. Mira helped collect samples while Kyle documented everything with obsessive precision. "It's the same condition," he told Elena's parents on the 3rd day. "Her immune system is attacking healthy tissue triggered by temperature fluctuations. The treatment that worked for the king should work for her." "Should?" the father asked. "Nothing in medicine is guaranteed, but I'm confident enough to try." Kyle met their eyes. "With your permission." They agreed immediately, desperately. Kyle prepared the temperature-regulating compound using the same formula that had saved Aldrich, adjusting the dosage for Elena's smaller size and younger metabolism. She took the first dose that evening. Within 12 hours, her fever had stabilized. Within 3 days, the constant pain had eased enough for her to sit up in bed. Within a week, she was walking around her room, color returning to her face. "It's working," Mira said, checking Elena's temperature for the 5th time that day. "The cellular response is normalizing, the inflammation is decreasing, it's actually working." Kale felt something release in his chest that he hadn't known was tightened. The cure wasn't unique to Aldrich, it was replicable, which meant there were others out there who could be saved. "How long will I need to take the compound?" Elena asked during one of Kyle's examinations. "Probably indefinitely. Your body's tendency to misidentify its own tissue won't go away completely. But with the compound maintaining stable temperature, the cascade won't trigger." He checked her pulse, pleased by its strength. "You'll need regular monitoring, adjustments as you grow and your metabolism changes, but you'll live." "Will I be normal?" Kyle thought about Aldrich, about himself, about everyone who'd survived impossible things by adapting rather than surrendering. "You'll be you," he said, "which is better than normal anyway." Word of Elena's recovery spread faster than Kyle expected. By the time they prepared to leave, merchants and craftspeople from surrounding towns had gathered, asking questions about the cure, about treatment, about hope. "You could stay," Elena's father suggested. "Set up practice here. We'd support you, provide whatever resources you need." "I appreciate that. But my place is at Blackridge." Kale handed over detailed instructions for Elena's ongoing care, including when to send for him if complications arose. "Besides, I'm not the only person who can learn this. Your local physicians are capable. They just need the right information." He spent his last day in town teaching the physicians about autoimmune conditions, about temperature regulation, about pattern recognition and symptoms. Some were skeptical. Others were hungry for knowledge. All of them listened. "You're creating competition," Mira observed as they rode north toward home. "Training people who could theoretically replace you." "Good. The goal isn't to be the only person who can do this. It's to make sure everyone who needs help can get it." Kale watched the landscape roll past. Besides, there are enough impossible problems to go around. They returned to Blackridge Hold to find it transformed. In the month they'd been gone, Aldrich had been busy. The new council was in place, carefully selected from loyal nobles and proven administrators. The fortress repairs were complete, and a new wing had been added to the medical facilities, specifically dedicated to research. "Welcome back," Aldrich said, meeting them in the courtyard. "How's the merchant girl?" "Alive. Recovering. The treatment works." Kale dismounted, his legs protesting after days in the saddle. "Which means you're going to get more requests, many more." "Already have. I've been filtering them based on your notes about symptoms and patterns." Aldrich gestured toward the keep. "Come on, there's something you should see." The new research wing was impressive, well-lit, well-equipped, with space for multiple physicians to work simultaneously. Corvain was already there, organizing supplies with the precision of someone who'd lost everything once and refused to risk it again. "This is for you," Aldrich said. "Well, for the work you started. Training other physicians, documenting treatments, researching conditions that conventional medicine can't solve." Kale walked through the space, recognizing equipment he'd described in passing conversations, supplies he'd mentioned needing, space configured exactly how he'd design it if given unlimited resources. "Why?" he asked. "Because you were right. The goal isn't to hoard your expertise, it's to spread it." Aldrich leaned against a workbench. "And because a king who almost died from an incurable disease has a vested interest in making sure cures exist for the next impossible illness. This is going to be expensive." "I'm a king. Expensive is relative." Aldrich's smile was sharp. "Besides, I've been seizing assets from convicted traitors. Might as well use their hoarded gold for something that actually helps people." Over the following months, the research wing became the center of Kael's world. He treated patients who traveled from across the kingdom, taught physicians who wanted to learn new approaches, and documented everything with obsessive care. Some cases he cured. Others he couldn't, and those failures haunted him more than the successes satisfied him. But even in failure, he learned, cataloging what didn't work, refining his understanding, preparing for the next attempt. Mira became his partner in all of it, her research skills complementing his diagnostic abilities perfectly. Corvain contributed his decades of experience, surprisingly willing to learn from someone a third his age. And physicians from other territories began arriving, some skeptical, but most genuinely interested in approaches that challenged conventional wisdom. "You're building something," Marcus observed one evening, finding Kael still working long after everyone else had left. "Not just treating patients, building a whole new way of thinking about medicine." "I'm just solving problems." "You're changing how people solve problems. There's a difference." Marcus set down a plate of food Kael had probably forgotten to eat. "Your mother would be proud, you know. Seeing you transform what was meant to be a death sentence into this." Kael hadn't thought about his mother in years. She died when he was young, killed in a territorial dispute that could have been avoided if someone had bothered to negotiate instead of fight. He'd learned strategy partly to honor her memory, to find solutions that didn't require violence. "She'd probably tell me to get more sleep," he said. "She'd tell you to appreciate what you've accomplished, instead of just seeing what's still broken." Marcus squeezed his shoulder. "But yes, also get more sleep." Word reached them 6 months after Elena's recovery that she'd made a full return to normal life. Her parents sent a letter describing her running through markets, helping with the family business, complaining about chores like any healthy teenager. The letter also mentioned that 2 other people in their region had presented with similar symptoms, and the local physicians had successfully treated them using Kael's protocols. "It's spreading," Kael told Aldrich, showing him the letter. "Not just the cure, but the understanding. People are starting to recognize these patterns, starting to think differently about treatment." "Good, though I hope you're prepared for what comes with that." Aldrich was reviewing territory maps, marking regions that had requested medical assistance. "Success makes you more valuable, which makes you more of a target. More than I already was. Different kind of target. Not political enemies wanting you dead, but desperate people wanting you for themselves. Nobles who'll try to bribe or coerce you into exclusive service. Rulers who'll see your expertise as something to control. I'm not leaving Blackridge." "I know, but they'll try anyway." Aldrich marked another location on the map. which is why I'm making it official. Royal decree, announced across all territories. Royal physician K.L. Thorne serves the crown directly, and any attempt to recruit, bribe, or coerce him away from that service will be treated as an act of aggression against the kingdom. Kyle stared at him. That's extreme. That's protection. You saved my life, Kale. I'm not letting someone steal you away because I failed to establish clear boundaries. The decree went out the following week. Reactions were mixed. Some territories grumbled about overreach. Others appreciated the clarity. A few tested the boundaries immediately. Duke Theron, whose envoy had been so rudely dismissed months earlier, sent another request, this time with complete medical documentation, humble language, and an offer of significant payment to the Crown's medical research fund rather than to Kael personally. He's learning, Kael observed, reading through the Duke's physician's notes. He's desperate. His condition has deteriorated significantly. Aldrich handed over additional reports. The question is whether you want to help him. Kael studied the symptoms. Advanced autoimmune condition, complicated by age and pre-existing heart problems. Difficult, but not impossible. I'll consult remotely first, review the documentation, suggest treatment protocols, see if their physicians can implement them. If that fails, I'll consider traveling there. Delegation. You're getting better at this. I'm getting realistic about limitations. I can't personally treat everyone, but I can teach people who can. The remote consultation worked. Duke Theron's physicians implemented Kael's protocols successfully, and within 2 months, the Duke was recovering. He sent a formal thank you letter to both Aldrich and Kael, along with a generous donation to the research wing. You just solved a political problem without leaving the fortress, Aldrich said. The eastern provinces are now friendly because you helped their Duke. That's diplomacy through medicine. That's just doing the job. It's more than that, and you know it. Maybe it was. Kael had started to notice how medical success translated to political advantage, how curing one influential person created ripple effects through entire territories. It wasn't why he did the work, but he couldn't ignore the consequences. The first anniversary of the coup's failure passed with formal ceremonies and public celebrations. Aldrich made a speech about loyalty, stability, and the kingdom's future. The executed traitors were remembered as cautionary tales, and Kael stood at the king's right hand wearing formal robes that marked him as both physician and advisor. Afterward, in the relative privacy of Aldrich's study, the king poured wine for both of them. A year ago you walked into this fortress expecting to die, Aldrich said. Now look at you. Royal physician, medical researcher, accidental diplomat. Accidental being the key word. The best things usually are. Aldrich raised his glass. To survival. To survival, Kael echoed. They drank in comfortable silence. Then Aldrich set down his glass, his expression turning serious. I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. All right. Are you happy here? Truly happy. Not just surviving or making the best of circumstances? Because if you're not, I'm happy, Kael interrupted. Or as close to happy as I know how to be. I'm doing work that matters, helping people who need it, building something that might outlast both of us. That's more than I ever expected from life. Even knowing you can never go home? Kael thought about the frontier packs, about the life he'd left behind. This is home now. Those people, this work, this fortress. It's not what I chose originally, but it's what I've built, and I'm not giving it up. Aldrich nodded slowly, accepting that. Good, because I have plans that involve you being here for a long time. What kind of plans? The kind where we expand the research wing, establish satellite medical facilities in other territories, and start training physicians across the kingdom in your methods. Aldrich pulled out rolled documents, spreading them across his desk. I want to create a network, centers of medical excellence that can handle complex cases, share knowledge, improve treatment for everyone. Kael studied the plans. They were ambitious, detailed, and would require years to implement. This is going to be expensive and complicated. And worthwhile. You proved that one person with the right knowledge can change everything. Imagine what a dozen people could do. 100. You're talking about revolutionizing medicine across the entire kingdom. I'm talking about making sure what happened to me, dying slowly while everyone watched helplessly, never happens to anyone else if we can prevent it. Aldrich met his eyes. Is that something you want to be part of? Kyle looked at the plans, seeing not just buildings and resources, but possibilities. People who could be saved, knowledge that could be spread, problems that could be solved. Yes, he said, let's do it. The expansion began immediately. Aldrich allocated resources, assigned administrators, and cut through political resistance with the authority of a king who'd survived assassination and coup. KL recruited physicians, designed curriculum, and established standards that prioritize competence over conventional credentials. Within 6 months, the first satellite facility opened in the Western Territories. Within a year, there were 3 more. Physicians trained at Blackridge began spreading across the kingdom, taking Kyle's methods and making them their own. Not everything went smoothly. Some physicians resisted the new approaches, preferring traditional methods. Others tried to use the network for personal advancement rather than patient care. And there were inevitable failures, patients who died despite treatment, conditions that resisted even the best efforts. But slowly, steadily, things improved. Mortality rates decreased, recovery times shortened. And people began to talk about medicine as something that could solve problems instead of just managing decline. You're changing the kingdom, Corvain said one evening, reviewing treatment statistics from across the network. Mortality from autoimmune conditions down 40%. Recovery rates up across multiple categories. These are significant improvements. They're a start, Kyle said. There's still so much we don't understand, so many conditions we can't treat. There will always be more work. That's the nature of medicine. Corvain set down the papers. But take a moment to appreciate what you've accomplished. You were sent here to die, and instead you've saved hundreds of lives. That means something. It did mean something. Kale was starting to understand that. 2 years after arriving at Blackridge Hold, Kale received a letter that made his hands shake. The seal was unfamiliar, but the handwriting wasn't. It was from someone in his old pack. He opened it carefully, half expecting threats or accusations. Instead, he found something unexpected. Kyle, I don't know if you remember me. We grew up together, though I doubt I made much impression. I'm writing because I have a daughter who's sick. The pack healers can't help her, and I heard you've been curing impossible illnesses. I know you owe us nothing, know you have no reason to help after what Garen did, but she's 6 years old and she's dying, and I'm desperate enough to ask anyway. If you can't or won't help, I understand. But if there's any chance... Taryn Kyle read the letter 3 times, feeling complicated emotions war in his chest. Taryn had been kind to him, back when kindness was rare. Never close friends, but never cruel either. And his daughter. He found Aldrich in the training yard, overseeing combat drills with the kind of focus that came from almost dying and refusing to ever be that vulnerable again. I need to go back to pack territory, Kyle said without preamble. Aldrich's expression shifted immediately. Why? Kale handed over the letter. The king read it quickly, his face unreadable. Garen's not going to like you returning, he said finally. Garen doesn't get a vote. The treaty allows for medical consultations across all territories, including pack lands. The treaty was written assuming you'd never actually want to go back. Aldrich returned the letter. But if this is what you want, I'll authorize it. Just be careful. You're walking back into a place that treated you as disposable. I'm not the same person they discarded. No, you're definitely not. The journey back to pack territory felt surreal. Kyle traveled with minimal escort, just Lyra and 2 other guards, not wanting to provoke hostility with an obvious military presence. Mira stayed at Blackridge, managing the research wing in his absence. The frontier lands looked smaller than he remembered. The pack compound that had dominated his entire world for 2 decades now seemed almost quaint compared to Blackridge Hold's sprawling fortress. Taryn met them at the territory border, his face a mixture of hope and anxiety. You came. I came. Take me to your daughter. The girl, Sarah, was indeed dying. Same symptoms Kale had seen in Aldrich and Elena, but accelerated by her young age and small body. She had maybe weeks left. Possibly less. Can you help her? Taryn asked, watching Kyle examine his daughter. Yes. The treatment that saved the king will work for her too. Kale prepared the compound, adjusting dosage for her size and age. But she'll need ongoing care. Someone who can monitor her temperature, adjust the compound as she grows, watch for complications. I'll do it, whatever it takes. I'll teach you. And I'll send supplies from Blackridge, enough to last until she's old enough for more stable dosing. Relief flooded Taryn's face. Thank you. I don't know how to repay. Help the next person who needs it. That's all the payment I want. Word spread quickly that Kyle had returned. People he'd grown up with appeared at Taryn's home, some curious, some apologetic, some clearly uncomfortable with his new status. He treated them all with polite distance, focusing on Sarah's care. On the third day, Garen summoned him. Kale could have refused, could have cited the treaty, his position, a dozen political reasons why the Alpha had no authority over him anymore. But he went anyway, curious what the man who'd traded him away wanted to say. Garen looked older. The stress of leadership showed in new lines around his eyes, gray in his hair, weariness in his posture. He received Kyle in his private office, not the public hall. Royal Physician, he said, the title sitting awkwardly on his tongue. I heard you were treating Taryn's daughter. I am. And doing it for free, apparently. I'm doing it because she's dying and I can help. Payment doesn't factor into it. Garen was silent for a long moment. Then he gestured to a chair. Sit, please. Kale remained standing. I know you hate me, Garen said finally. You have every right to. I traded you away like property, threatened your father, stripped your name from our records. I was cruel because I saw you as weak, and I thought that weakness made you worthless. Is there a point to this confession? The point is, I was wrong. Profoundly wrong. Garen moved to the window, looking out over packed territory. You proved that strength comes in forms I couldn't recognize, and now you're one of the most powerful people in the kingdom, while I'm still here managing the same 500 wolves I've always managed. You want something. I want you to understand that I'm sorry, truly sorry, not just politically sorry. Garen turned back. And I want you to know that if you ever decide to return, not as royal physician, just as Kale Thorne who grew up here, you'd be welcome. Your father, too. Kale studied the Alpha who'd shaped so much of his life through casual cruelty and calculated decisions. Seeing him now, diminished and genuinely remorseful, Kyle felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, just a quiet acceptance that this chapter was closed. I appreciate that, he said, but my home is at Blackridge now. My work, my purpose, my future, they're all there. I figured, but I wanted to offer anyway. Garen smiled sadly. For what it's worth, the pack talks about you. The wolf who saved a king. The one we let slip through our fingers. You've become a legend here. Legends are easier to appreciate than actual people. True enough, Kale left the meeting feeling strangely light. He'd expected confrontation, anger, maybe even danger. Instead, he'd found closure. Garen was just a man who'd made mistakes, and Kyle was someone who'd moved beyond those mistakes into something better. Sarah responded to treatment beautifully. Within a week, her fever had stabilized. Within 2, she was eating properly again. By the time Kale prepared to leave, she was running around her parents' home, color back in her cheeks, life returning to her eyes. She'll need monitoring, Kyle told Taryn, leaving detailed instructions and supplies. Any changes in symptoms, any unusual responses, send word to Blackridge immediately, but barring complications, she should live a long, healthy life. Because of you. Because we understood the problem and had the tools to fix it. Kyle packed his medical bag. The knowledge exists now. Use it. Share it. Help others who need it. The ride back to Blackridge felt like returning home, not leaving it. Lyra noticed his improved mood. Went well? She asked. Better than expected. I saved a child, got closure with my past, and confirmed that I made the right choice staying with the king. That's quite productive for one trip. Aldrich was waiting when they returned, reviewing reports in his study. He looked up as Kyle entered, searching his face for signs of distress or conflict. How was it? He asked. Enlightening. The girl will live, the Alpha apologized, and I realized I don't belong there anymore, if I ever really did. And you're all right with that? I'm better than all right. Kale settled into his usual chair, feeling the familiar comfort of the space. I spent years in that pack feeling like I didn't fit, like I was somehow broken for not being the kind of wolf they valued. Turns out, I wasn't broken. I just needed a different environment. Or you needed to build your own environment. Aldrich set aside his reports, which is what you've been doing here. The research wing, the satellite facilities, the network of trained physicians, that's all you, Kyle. I provided resources, but you created the vision. We created it together. Delegation again. You really have learned politics. They worked through the evening, reviewing cases and planning the next expansion phase. It was comfortable, familiar, the rhythm of two people who'd learned to work together through crisis and emerged as something resembling friends. No, more than friends. Partners, maybe. Two people who'd saved each other's lives and built something meaningful from that foundation. 3 years after arriving at Blackridge Hold, Kyle stood in the completed Grand Medical Academy, the flagship institution of the kingdom's new medical network. The building was impressive. Multiple wings for different specialties, lecture halls that could hold hundreds of students, research laboratories equipped with the finest instruments available. Aldrich had spared no expense, and it showed. "This is what survival looks like," the king said, standing beside Kyle at the academy's opening ceremony. Below them, hundreds of people gathered, physicians from across the kingdom, students eager to learn new methods, patients whose lives had been saved by those methods. "This is what happens when you refuse to accept the impossible," Kyle corrected. "Same thing, really." The ceremony began. Aldrich gave a speech about progress, innovation, and the kingdom's commitment to medical advancement. Corvain spoke about the evolution of medical practice. And then Kyle was called forward to address the crowd. He'd prepared remarks, but standing there looking out at all those faces, he abandoned the formal speech. 4 years ago, I was sent to this kingdom to die, he said simply. The crowd went silent. My own alpha traded me away like livestock, expecting I'd provide brief comfort to a dying king and then fade into obscurity. Instead, I found a problem that needed solving, a patient who refused to give up, and an opportunity to prove that weakness and strength are just different ways of looking at the same person. He paused, gathering his thoughts. Everyone in this room has been told something is impossible, a disease that can't be cured, a patient who can't be saved, a condition that doesn't have a treatment. And maybe those things were true yesterday, but today, right now, we have the knowledge and tools to make impossible things possible. That's what this academy represents. Not just medical education, but a fundamental rejection of the idea that we have to accept suffering when we could prevent it. The crowd erupted into applause. Kyle stepped back, feeling overwhelmed by the response, and Aldrich's hand on his shoulder steadied him. "Well said," the king murmured, "though you're going to have every impossible case in the kingdom showing up now." "Good. We've built a place that can handle them." The academy's first class began the following week. 60 students from across the kingdom, selected not for noble birth or wealth, but for aptitude and dedication. Kyle taught some classes himself, sharing diagnostic techniques and pattern recognition methods. Corvain handled anatomy and traditional medicine. Mira led research methodology. And slowly, carefully, they began building the next generation of physicians who thought differently about medicine. Not all the students succeeded. Some lacked the necessary rigor. Others couldn't adapt to methods that challenged everything they'd been taught. But enough thrived that within 2 years, the academy was producing physicians who went out into the kingdom and immediately made impacts. Kyle tracked their progress obsessively. Heard about the student who'd set up practice in mountain villages and reduced child mortality by half. About another who'd established a treatment center for veterans with chronic conditions. About a third who'd gone back to their home territory and revolutionized how they handled infectious disease. "You're building a legacy," Marcus said, watching Kyle review reports from academy graduates. "These people are going out and changing lives because you taught them how. They're doing it because they care enough to try. They're doing it because you showed them it's possible." 5 years after arriving at Blackridge Hold, Kyle woke to find the fortress in celebration mode. Banners hung from every tower, servants rushed around preparing feast tables, and soldiers wore ceremonial armor. He'd forgotten what day it was until Mira appeared at his door, grinning. "Really? You forgot your own anniversary?" "It's not my anniversary. It's the king's recovery anniversary." "Which is your anniversary of saving him. Stop being modest and get dressed in something formal. There's a ceremony." The ceremony was elaborate. Aldrich had invited nobles from across the kingdom, representatives from every territory, even a few foreign dignitaries who'd heard about the medical advances and wanted to establish relationships. And at the center of it all, Aldrich stood before his assembled court and did something unexpected. 5 years ago, I was dying, he said, his voice carrying across the great hall. My body was failing, my kingdom was fracturing, and everyone around me was preparing for my death. Then a frontier wolf arrived, sent as a sacrifice by an alpha who saw him as disposable. That wolf, Kyle Thorne, refused to accept the inevitable. He studied my condition, developed a cure, and saved my life. The crowd murmured appreciatively. They'd heard this story before. But he didn't stop there, Aldrich continued. He built a research wing, trained other physicians, established medical facilities across the kingdom, created an academy that's revolutionizing how we approach medicine. And he did it all while maintaining his role as royal physician, treating patients, advancing knowledge, and generally making everyone else look lazy by comparison. Scattered laughter rippled through the hall. In recognition of these extraordinary services to the crown and kingdom, I hereby grant Kyle Thorne the title of Duke of the Southern Medical Territories, with all rights and privileges thereof. Kyle's mind went blank. Duke? Territory? What? Aldrich was still talking. The Southern Medical Territories will encompass the Academy and all associated facilities. Duke Thorne will govern these lands with full authority, using them to further medical research and education as he sees fit. The Crown will provide funding and protection, asking only that the Duke continue doing exactly what he's been doing. The hall erupted in applause. Kyle stood frozen, trying to process what had just happened. He'd been given a territory, actual land, actual governance, actual noble title. Him, the frontier wolf who'd been traded away as worthless. Later, in the privacy of Aldrich's study, Kyle finally found his voice. You made me a duke. I gave you the resources to properly do your work without political interference. Aldrich poured wine for both of them. The Southern Territories needed a governor anyway, and you're already managing most of the medical facilities there. This just makes it official. People are going to be furious. A wolf with no noble blood given territory? Let them be furious. You've earned this 10 times over. Aldrich handed him a glass. Besides, I'm the king. If I want to create a new noble line based on merit rather than birth, that's my prerogative. A new noble line. Kyle's laugh came out slightly hysterical. My father was a pack enforcer. My mother died in a territorial dispute, and now I'm nobility. Now you're someone who can actually change how an entire section of the kingdom operates. Use it well. Duke Kyle Thorne, the title still felt absurd, threw himself into governing the Southern Medical Territories with the same intensity he'd applied to everything else. He established clinics in underserved areas, funded research into conditions that affected common people, and built infrastructure that prioritized health over profit. The traditional nobility grumbled as expected, but they couldn't argue with results. Mortality rates in the Southern Territories dropped dramatically. Productivity increased as workers spent less time sick, and the academy became a destination for talented students, regardless of their birth circumstances. You're proving it's possible, Mira said during one of their research sessions. A nobility based on what you do, not who your parents were. I'm proving that one weird exception can exist if backed by enough royal authority. Still counts. 7 years after arriving at Blackridge Hold, Kyle received a letter from Elena, the merchant's daughter, who'd been his first successful case outside of treating Aldrich. She was 21 now, healthy, and writing to tell him she'd been accepted to the medical academy. I want to help others the way you helped me, she wrote. I want to learn how to see the impossible and make it possible. And maybe, if I'm very lucky and work very hard, I'll be half as good as you someday. Kyle kept that letter in his desk, pulling it out on difficult days when failures mounted and problems seemed unsolvable. It reminded him why the work mattered. More letters came over the years, from patients he'd saved, from students he'd taught, from physicians he'd trained. Each one a small confirmation that the impossible thing he'd started was growing into something sustainable. 10 years after arriving at Blackridge Hold, Kyle stood in his study, formerly a storage room, now converted into a space filled with medical journals, research notes, and correspondence from across the kingdom, and tried to remember what it felt like to be that terrified wolf who'd walked into a dying king's fortress expecting to die. He couldn't quite manage it. That person felt like a stranger now. A knock at the door. Aldrich entered without waiting for permission, moving with the easy confidence of someone who'd fully recovered and stayed that way for a decade. "The Academy's 10th anniversary ceremony is tomorrow," the king said. "You're expected to give a speech." "I'm aware. Have you written anything?" "Several drafts, all terrible." Cale gestured to the crumpled papers on his desk. "I don't know what to say. Thank you for not dying when you were supposed to? Glad we accidentally built something meaningful? How about the truth?" Aldrich settled into a chair, looking relaxed in a way he never had during those early desperate days. "That you were sent here to die, refused, and changed an entire kingdom's approach to medicine in the process." "That sounds arrogant." "It sounds accurate." Aldrich studied him thoughtfully. "You know what I think about sometimes? What would have happened if you'd failed? If I died despite your efforts, if the cure hadn't worked, if you'd gone back to your alpha having lost the gamble? I'd probably be dead. Garen doesn't tolerate failure." "Exactly. You bet everything on an impossible cure working, on your ability to solve a problem that had stumped experts for years. That took either remarkable courage or remarkable desperation. Mostly desperation. Same thing in my experience." Aldrich stood, preparing to leave. "Write your speech, Duke Thorne, and make it good. The entire medical community will be watching." The anniversary ceremony drew physicians from across the kingdom and beyond. The academy had expanded significantly, now training hundreds of students annually. Satellite facilities operated in every major territory. The mortality rate from previously incurable conditions had dropped by more than 60%. Cale stood before the assembled crowd and delivered a speech that abandoned false modesty for honest reflection. 10 years ago, I was nobody," he said. "A frontier wolf with a weak constitution, valued only for my mind, and even that was barely appreciated. I was traded away to die, sent to provide brief comfort to a king everyone had given up on, and I walked into Blackridge Hold expecting exactly that. A few weeks or months of managing someone's decline, followed by my own irrelevance or death." He paused, meeting eyes across the crowd. Elena sat in the front row, now a promising physician herself. Students he'd taught filled the hall. Patients he'd saved stood alongside families of those he'd helped. "But I found something here I'd never had before. A problem worth solving, and someone who believed I could solve it. King Aldrich didn't just let me try an impossible cure, he demanded I try, gave me resources, defended my methods against skeptics and enemies. And when the cure actually worked, he didn't hoard that success. He asked, 'What else is possible?'" Cale gestured to the academy building around them. "This is the answer. This academy, these physicians, these treatments, they're all answers to that question. What else is possible when we refuse to accept impossible as final? How many people can we save if we're willing to challenge conventional wisdom? What can we build if we value competence over pedigree?" The crowd was silent, listening intently. "I'm not special," Kyle continued. "I'm just someone who got lucky, lucky to meet a king who valued results over tradition, lucky to have access to resources and expertise, lucky to survive long enough to learn from failures and build on successes. But this academy isn't about luck. It's about creating systems where anyone with talent and dedication can learn to solve impossible problems. Where the next person who faces an incurable disease doesn't have to hope for a miracle. They can access treatments we develop right here." He concluded simply, 10 years ago, I was sent here to die. Instead, I learned how to live. And now we're teaching others to do the same. That's worth celebrating." The applause was thunderous. Afterward, during the feast, people approached Kyle constantly. Physicians wanting to discuss cases, students seeking advice, nobles attempting to curry favor with the unusual duke who'd risen from nothing. He handled it all with practiced efficiency now, having learned over the years how to navigate court politics without losing sight of actual goals. Marcus found him during a rare quiet moment, pressing a cup of wine into his hands. "Your mother really would have been proud," his father said, "seeing you transform what was meant to destroy you into something that helps thousands." "I just didn't want to die. You did more than not die. You built a legacy." Marcus clinked his cup against Kyle's. "To survival." "To survival," Cale echoed, the familiar toast taking on new weight. Later that night, as the celebrations wound down, Kael found himself on the fortress walls again. The same spot where he'd stood a decade earlier, watching Garrett's army in the hills, wondering if he'd survive the week. Aldrich joined him, both of them comfortable with silence now after years of partnership. "Any regrets?" the king asked eventually. Kael considered the question seriously. "Some. Patients I couldn't save, treatments that didn't work, time wasted on political maneuvering when I could have been doing actual medicine. But overall, no. This life, the work, the impact, the purpose, it's more than I ever imagined possible." Kael looked out over the fortress, seeing not just military defenses but the medical wing, the research facilities, the academy in the distance. "I was sent here as a sacrifice. Instead, I became something I chose to be." "And what's that?" Kael thought about the question, about everything he'd learned and built and survived. "Someone who matters," he said finally, "not because of birth or title or political power, but because I solve problems that need solving and help people who need help. That's enough. More than enough." Aldrich's smile was genuine. "You know what the best part is? We're not done. There are still impossible problems to solve, still conditions we don't understand, still people who need help. The work continues." "Good," Kael said. "I'd be bored otherwise." They stood together on the walls as night settled over Blackridge Hold, and Kael felt something he'd rarely experienced in his first 2 decades of life. Complete certainty that he was exactly where he belonged. He'd been sent here to die. Instead, he'd learned to live. And in doing so, he'd helped countless others do the same. The impossible had become possible, the disposable had become invaluable, and the sacrifice had transformed into something sovereign. Not bad for a frontier wolf who'd never been strong enough to fight, but had always been stubborn enough to survive. Far below, in the medical wing, lights burned late into the night as physicians worked on cases that would have been impossible a decade ago. In the academy, students studied techniques that hadn't existed when Kael first arrived. And across the kingdom, people lived who would have died without the systems and knowledge he'd helped create. The work would continue long after he was gone. That was the real victory, not just surviving, but building something that would outlast him. Kael smiled, finished his wine, and headed inside. There was always another impossible problem waiting to be solved, and he'd never been one to back down from impossible.